Okay, good morning, everybody. I'd like to call our regularly scheduled meeting for December 11th of the El Dorado Irrigation District Board to order. And we will start with roll call, please, Jen.
Okay, I just want to remind everyone
Each your microphone.
that you need to pull that mic really close and talk into the mic. We have several members of the public that like to hear, and I'm sure folks in the back. So I know we have them positioned a little ways, but pull that mic right up when you're speaking, please. Directors Osborne, Dwyer, Veerkamp, Anzini, and Day present. General Manager Abercrombie, General Counsel Polson, and Clerk to the Board Sullivan present.
All right, thank you very much. Manager Jim Abercrombie, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Silence this time of year especially. We will now adopt the agenda.
A move that we adopt the agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, do we, just for a thought, do we want to wait on the nomination and election till after? We've got quite a heavy schedule. Pleasure of the board to move that to the end.
Traditionally do it at the beginning, but
We do it at
I'm-
the beginning,
that's
so.
okay if you want to wait. I don't know.
Okay, everybody okay with that? All right, we'll just move that to the end. Other than that, the adoption of the agenda, we have a motion and a second, I believe, with that amendment. Jen, you got that? Okay. All right, with that, we'll take any public input at this time on any items, on the adoption of the agenda. Getting ahead of myself.
If members of the public would like to address the board at any public comment period during this meeting, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. This is for public comment on the adoption of today's agenda, moved by Director Anzini and seconded by Director Dwyer. President Veerkamp, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the adoption of today's agenda. Would you like me to call for the vote?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, communications, general manager, employee recognition.
None today, thank you.
All right, thank you, Jim. Public comment. This would be for items that are not on the agenda today. Any public comment on items that are not on the agenda today? I'm seeing none in the audience. Jen, anybody online? Hang on a second, we got,
Oh, can you explain where the vote is in the agenda for the increase on the water rates and sewer? That's on the agenda, correct?
Yes.
Can you
yeah,
tell us what
it's
item
on the
that is?
agenda, and it'll be coming up soon.
You know what item that is?
It is
18.
public hearing item.
16, yep. All right, one more time in the audience, anybody on an item that is not on the agenda today? Okay, Jen online?
If members of the public would like to address the board during our public comment period, now is the time. You could press the raise your hand button at the bottom of the screen, or *9 if you're participating via telephone. President Veerkamp, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak on any items not on today's agenda.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Communications, general manager, Jim?
None today, thank you.
Clerk of the the board? Jen, you have any?
None today, thank you.
Board of Directors, Alan, Lori? None? George, no? I do have one report, LAFCO, we met last week and we adopted the or the MSRs for the city of Placerville, Cameron Park, CSD, and the city of South Lake Tahoe. That's Wednesday's meeting. All right, approve consent calendar. Are there any items that need to be pulled from consent?
I would like to pull item number 1.
All right. Other items, Alan, you good? Okay. Pat?
Yeah, I'll move that we approve the consent calendar with the comment that I'd like to recognize the 4 items that are in there applying for grants to help reduce
You took my steam, okay.
help reduce the impact on the ratepayers. And thanks to the staff that worked hard to get those grants submitted, and we've been fairly successful in the past. So that's my comment.
Yes, I do.
Just one more reminder, I'm going to be a pain, I apologize. Please really pull that mic into your, when you're talking, Folks in the back are having a little trouble hearing, folks online. Thank you.
I'll second mine as item 1.
Thank you, George. Okay, and we've pulled item 1. All right.
You're back there? It worked?
Okay. All right, so we.
George Osborne's mic is not working.
Sounds like it was. All right, we've pulled item 1 from consent, and we have a motion for approval from Director Dwyer.
1, 2, oh, there we go.
Second by Director Osborne, looking for public input on the consent calendar. Seeing none. Jen, anybody online?
If members of the public would like to address the board at any public comment period during this meeting, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. This is for the adoption of today's consent calendar, moved by Director Dwyer and seconded by Director Osborne, minus consent calendar item number 1. President Veerkamp, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak. Would you like me to call for the vote?
Yes, please.
Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Those opposed, say no. Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much, Jen. We will now move to item 1.
Yes.
Director
Can-
Anzini.
Can you hear me? Anybody? Hold it closer. You know what? Okay, the only reason why I had item number 1 pulled, I just wanted to get the record straight that that was at our workshop on November 13th. And Alan, Director Day and myself attended. There was no quorum, but I wanted to reflect in the minutes that I was in attendance.
All right, thank you, Director Anzini. With that, would entertain a motion for approval on item 1.
So moved.
Thank you, Dir-
Seconded.
Motion and second. Any comment on item 1? Anybody online? Jen, want to comment on item 1?
If members of the public would like to make a comment on consent calendar item number 1, moved by Director Dwyer and seconded by Director Anzini, now is the time. President Veerkamp, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak. Would you like me to call for the vote?
Yes, please.
Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Those opposed, say no. Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Jen. We will now move to our items, open items. And item 16 is the public hearing.
The
And it's-
public hearing will be opened at 9:09 a.m.
Thank you, Jen. I believe Jamie Bandy or Jim, you're going to kick it off?
I'll kick it off, and then Jamie will, or then Brian Mueller will have a presentation, and Jamie Bandy, and I'll be the closer. Thank you for attending today. If you can pull up the PowerPoint. And the next slide. Today is the culmination of about a year's worth of public meetings, workshops, where we've briefed the board on the reasons for the proposed rate increase. And today will be a summary of that, both the need for that and then some of the board discussion. Back in June, and we put this up because back in June, the board had a presentation where they provided kind of the 3 high priorities that they wanted to see out of a updated cost of service study. And they wanted to make sure things are balanced to the extent possible. One, they wanted to have affordability balanced, infrastructure reliability, which is, clean, safe drinking water. Everybody wants that. And some rate stability. And those were the 2 principles that the board shared with staff and the consultant, and we tried to balance those. And everybody has a different perspective of the importance of that, but those were the 3 priorities that we worked on. Next slide, please. In August, we presented 2 alternatives, a 12% increase and a 9%. We'll start with the 12% first. The 12% increases meets the overall debt service requirements, maintains a strong bond rating, lowers our borrowing costs. It actually defers fewer capital improvement projects than the other alternative. It does not meet our reserve requirements. That's important because if we wanted to try and meet those reserve requirements, it would even be higher. But we thought, no, it's a big chunk to swallow. So let's not go and meet our reserve requirements. We're actually less than what was proposed. It does include a cumulative increase of 76% over 5 years. And then that's the monthly and bi-monthly impact to our customers. And the credit rating and the bond rating is really important as we move forward because we'll be borrowing, the board directs us, borrowing money to help pay for a lot of the infrastructure. Next slide. If you compare that with the 9% increases that were evaluated back in August of this year, 9% does not meet our debt service requirements unless we cut significant amount of capital out of the plan. It does risk our bond ratings because we're very thin on the debt service coverage, which could lead to increased borrowing costs. If we're trying to make our debt service coverage, it defers significant amount of CIP projects. Does not meet our reserve targets, a much smaller increase, 54% increase over 5 years, and then you'll see the monthly and bi-monthly impacts on that. Next slide. This is just kind of back one, is kind of a quick summary. If you look at the change between a 12 and 9, the first 3 years, we were going to borrow about $60 million to start on the capital improvement plan. And that would require the 12% increase, which would generate an additional $4.9 million in revenue to help pay for the infrastructure requirements. If we changed it to a 9%, it would be about $3.6 million in revenue. The difference, of course, is $1.2 million, which would negatively impact our ability to issue $60 million bonds. We'll have to decrease that significantly. We did have our consultant revise the model just to double check because, we've heard from our customers that they're concerned about the proposed rate increase. And he indicated that instead of over 5 years, 180 million, that we'd be down to about $70 million in debt that we could issue and still maintain our credit rating. One of the big things that also impacted or would impact the district and our ratepayers is under a 9% scenario, there's zero rate revenue going to capital. Zero, and typically it's in the 10 to 12 million range. In the 12% rate increase proposal, be $18 million of rates going to help pay for pay-as-you-go projects in capital. Next slide, please. And we all like to look at, oh, well, geez, EID's rates are horrible and you know, they're way out of line with a lot of other entities. Well, like myself, no one likes to pay for either increased cell phone bills or water bills or anything else. This is just an overall comparison of where EID's bills ranks with the other utilities. But the next slide is even a little more telling. We thought, well, if you look at all the other entities like City of Roseville and City of Folsom, they're pretty condensed. I mean, you have a lot of people in a small area that can pay for their projects because of the density. Here, we're spread out so far. So we thought, what would be the foothill entities comparisons, like Placer County Water Agency, Nevada Irrigation District, Calaveras County Water District, and Amador Water Agency. If we just took those and looked at the comparisons, it's in the, what is that, about $190 range bi-monthly. And the proposed one, we'd be down at $153. So overall, from comparison to other foothill communities, we're in a much lower cost per customer on a bi-monthly basis. Next slide. Also, a lot of folks said, well, did you do a public outreach program? And if you read the information in the agenda package, we had significant efforts to share with the public why we needed the money, and we added 50 posts on Facebook and Nextdoor, 6 editions of the Waterfront, a lot of social media posts. Actually, we had some good responses to some of them, like Silver Lake Dam. One customer said, well, it's only, what, about 100 years old. It's about time to replace it, and are you going to borrow the money for it? So we had a pretty good interchange on that. We also offered tours of our water and wastewater plants, and then we did the public Prop 218 notice that also describes some of the projects we're planning to work on, as well as open houses, et cetera. So I think we did a pretty good job on outreaching to our customers on the need for that. With that, we'll switch over and have Brian Mueller talk a little bit about the specifics of the projects we are either completing or being proposed.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Can everybody hear me okay? My name is Brian Mueller. I'm the Director of Engineering with EID. And some of this may be a repeat for those that have attended the workshop. No? Oh. That would help.
Yeah.
Much better. So I'll repeat again. My name is Brian Mueller. I'm the Director of Engineering with EID. And again, this might be a little bit of a repeat for some that attended the workshop, but the purpose of my presentation here today is to describe our various services in the water and wastewater systems that help to deliver our service and you know, basically how water gets to our taps. And then I'll get into some of the projects that we have on tap in the next 5 years from our capital improvement plan. Just starting with our water systems, we really get our water supplies from 3 different areas. Our hydroelectric Project 184 system consists of about 1/3 of our water supply. This consists of 5 lakes and reservoirs. If you've recreated up in the upper upcountry, Echo Lake, Silver Lake, Caples Lake may be familiar to you, as well as Flora Bay Reservoir and Pollock Pines. We take water from those reservoirs, we divert it out at Kybers through a diversion dam into a 22-mile-long canal and flume system. We also have a 21-megawatt powerhouse that we use to help offset some of our costs. It generates about $3 to $5 million in annual revenue But the primary purpose of that project is a water supply project. We've got 2 different water rights associated with that, totaling over 30,000 acre feet for consumptive use. Next slide.
Brian, before you move on, I just wanted to let folks online know that once the presentation is complete, we will take questions and have comments. So for now, the person ending in 911, I'm going to go ahead and lower your hand. And if you can just save your questions till the end, then we'll answer any questions or comments that you may have, or receive any comments or questions that you may have at that time.
Okay, and then this is just an aerial photo of our Project 184 system. You can see at the top of the photo our primary lakes that provide that water supply. Again, that water travels down the South Fork of the American River. We divert out at Kybers through our canal system, eventually ends up in the Pollock Pines area, Four Bay Reservoir, where we either divert it for consumptive use to a treatment plant or to our powerhouse. Next slide. Moving to our drinking water system. Again, we have 3 primary treatment facilities, 2 up in the upper country in either Pollock Pines or Sly Park area. And we also have a treatment facility in El Dorado Hills. We have a pretty large service area, 220 square miles. And as Jim mentioned, not a whole lot of customers compared with that square mileage. And I'll have a chart here to describe that a little bit more. The amount of pipelines in our system, over 1,100 miles of pipelines, several storage tanks, pumping stations, pressure reducing stations, a lot are required in order to deliver that water to our customers with our varying topography in the county. We serve over 43,000 service connections and about over 130,000 actual customers in our system. Next slide. And this is just a depiction of all the water lines in our service area. All the blue lines are water lines. And really, you can see from the far right of the slide, you see Jenkinson Lake. That's one of our primary water supplies. The Project 184 eventually heads down to Reservoir 1 water treatment plant. All that water is treated with those 2 blue dots and travels through all those transmission mains, heading westward towards, of course, Camino, Pleasant Valley area, Diamond Springs, city of Placerville, on into Shingle Springs, Cameron Park, and all the way down to El Dorado Hills. And then on the far left, we have the Folsom Lake located on the far left with a treatment plant there, and that primarily serves our customers in El Dorado Hills. And kind of what Jim was describing earlier with the chart here, we took a look at how many water services or water connections the district serves per square mile of service area. And so you can see EID in the left and in the yellowish orange, just under 200 connections per square mile, which is really low compared with other agencies. We mentioned Calaveras County, they're also low, but they're a little bit higher than EID. But really, when you compare us with city of Folsom, even the city of Sacramento, just a much denser area, a lot more customers per square mile to spread the cost. So that's one area where EID and foothill agencies like us are a bit hampered as far as when we're talking about rates. And next slide. On the wastewater collection side, we have 4 treatment facilities. We have 2 large wastewater treatment facilities, one in El Dorado Hills on the south side of Highway 50 and in Cameron Park. That serves about 25,000 connections, primarily in the El Dorado Hills, Cameron Park, Diamond Springs area. We also have several lift stations or pumping stations that pump wastewater due to the topography of the county to get where it needs to go to our wastewater facilities. Next slide. We also have a smaller recycled water system for customers in El Dorado Hills. About 95 miles of recycled pipelines, storage tanks, pump stations as well. We serve about almost 5,700 recycled water customers. And so, of course, all those facilities I just described takes a lot of operations and maintenance in order to, continue to provide reliable services. This is just a depiction of our wastewater and recycle water system in the green and purple. Next slide. Recreation. So we also, our last line of service is recreation. We provide recreation primarily, as most are familiar, at Jenkinson Lake. We also have some facilities in Silver Lake, Oyster Creek, Caples Lake, and Echo Lake. And a small facility at Four Bay Reservoir. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to transition into some of the projects that we both have undertaken or are planning to undertake in the next 5 years, just to give an idea of some of the costs and the infrastructure it takes to maintain our service. So I'll start in El Dorado Hills, the Folsom Lake intake. This is a large pump station that we pump water from Folsom Lake to deliver to customers in El Dorado Hills. This was originally built in the 1960s, so over the years we were having lots of troubles trying to maintain reliability of that service. We had failed pumps. We tried to put in temporary pumps, floating pumps, trying to maintain the reliability of that pump station. In 2020, we finally went ahead and did a large replacement project. It cost over $42 million to upgrade that pump station. We did get a grant to help offset that from the federal government to also incorporate temperature control, so we have the ability to control, what water temperature we receive into our system. So in total, the $42 million, it gives us a much more reliable system for a third of that water supply that serves El Dorado Hills. Next slide. Going back on the far eastern side of the system, our upper main ditch pipeline, this was a project we completed in 2022 for about $50 million. This was a pipeline that replaced a previously open and unlined ditch. So the purpose of that project was to install this pipeline. It really protects our source water quality. It also greatly reduced the amount of water losses that were occurring in the old ditch. And that pipeline really traverses from Four Bay Reservoir and Pollock Pines to one of our water treatment plants. The picture in the upper left while I'm here is a picture of our Four Bay Reservoir. That was another project that we completed from 2017 to 2020. That was a dam safety regulatory mandate that we undertook, and just the cost of that project alone to upgrade the dam at Four Bay Reservoir was about $26 million. Next slide. The district has been embarking on just a planned replacement of our canal and flume system. In our capital improvement plans, we have wooden flumes that we have been targeting and replacing over the years. But every once in a while we have emergencies, and the Caldor fire was certainly a devastating one. That took out 4 of our wooden flumes in 2021, and it required an emergency replacement of 4 wooden flumes. So this is just a picture of one. This is flume 30, where you can see the previously wooden flume, the damage, and then what we do is we replace these, both planned and unplanned cases like this one, with concrete, so that it's just a much more reliable and hardy facility that we can convey our water supply in. Next slide. This is a picture of our capital improvement plan. So kind of moving forward here, every year the district adopts a 5-year capital improvement plan. It entails various different categories. You can see there the major expenses in the capital improvement plan really are in the water, wastewater, and the hydroelectric or Project 184 category. You can see the expenses there. In total, it's about, for the next 5 years plan that was just adopted in this last October, it totals about $321 million, which is a lot of money. We know that. But again, when you look at the value of our assets that are in the ground, it's over $1 billion of depreciated assets. So this is historical cost. So if you kind of consider, if we had to replace our whole entire system, historically, it was over $1 billion. It'd be just many times in magnitude greater to replace that. So the $321 million over the next 5 years gives a little perspective compared with our overall system of what we're trying to replace. Next slide. And then the initial CIP versus adopted. So every year before we bring this to the board, this is not just a plan where we throw together pretty quickly and bring to the board, kind of a wish list. This is really a plan that we take a lot of care and consideration before we bring this to the board. Our engineering staff, our operations staff, finance staff get together, and we kind of develop a list of what we think needs to be done in the next 5 years, and then pare that down to what we really can do financially and from a resource standpoint. So just an example, this year, we counted about over $400 million of expenditures that we think needs to be done, but we deferred that. We deferred about $90 million of that in order to meet our financial objectives beyond 2029. That does come with risks that we know. Things don't get less expensive as we go forward. So projects that we defer today will be more expensive if we do those, beyond 5 years. Could have some potential negative impacts from outages and the sort or different failures. But again, as this year we adopted a 5-year plan of about $321 million. And we also have a district performance measure. We try to, undertake all the projects that are in the CIP, but we don't always get to every one of them, or just the expenditures never reach that planned level. Typically, it's about 70-90% of what we plan. Invariably, projects get delayed or deferred for various reasons, or the priorities changed. So we typically spend between 70 to 90% of what the planned CIP describes. And so for this year, with our financial plan that we also adopt every year, we included about $270 million in our financial planning, about $230 million on the water side, and about $40 million on the wastewater side. I'm not going to go through each of these projects, but these are just an example of the projects that we deferred before it went to our board for approval. Now, for this slide, I'll talk about the water treatment plant improvements. I described our water treatment plants. Those are aging facilities. A lot of those were built either between the 60s to the 1980s. Over the last several years, we've gone through a pretty comprehensive condition assessment of all of our plants. That the results of that showed that our water treatment plants, the useful life of those plants, have been taken up about 67% or 2/3 of the life of those plants have been expended. So we've got limited amount of life remaining in those plants before we need to upgrade those. In the example of El Dorado Hills Water Plant, in our 5-year CIP, we included about $63 million of projects to try to improve El Dorado Hills Water Plant reliability, while the condition assessment identified about $115 million that we really should be doing. So in effect, we've deferred about $51 million just for that one plant beyond the next 5 years. And the same for Reservoir 1 water plant in Pollock Pines. We deferred about $40 million from what our condition assessment is telling us we should be doing. Reservoir A, about $14 million, and the Strawberry water treatment plant is a small treatment plant that we serve customers in Strawberry, about $3 million. Next slide. Again, just a similar list for this slide. I'll just talk about our flumes. Flumes replacement is a pretty expensive endeavor. And in this next 5 years, we've actually are proposing to only do one flume replacement in our next 5 years. So you can see flume 45, section 3, all those other flumes through 48 have been deferred for construction. We'd like to complete the design of those projects to get them ready for construction, but we're actually deferring those and not planning to construct any flume replacements besides one small one in the next 5 years. I mentioned the consequences of deferral already, but just to reiterate, you know, it's a balancing act, as Jim mentioned, between reliability and cost. But again, deferring projects that we've seen before, it could result in emergency replacement, downtime, increased outages, higher repair and replacement costs. It's just going to get more expensive as we go forward. Even could involve some safety risk, regulatory implications, as well as litigation. So really don't want to defer projects, but in this case, you know, invariably we need to meet our financial objectives here. Just some examples of previously deferred projects that we've seen some increases for. We have a tank recoating program. We really need to be on top of our tank recoating program. Every 15 years is the recommended amount. If we go over that, we've seen some examples here. This is the inside of a steel tank where we experienced a lot of rust, and for the case of the Bass Lake tanks in Reservoir 2, they got so bad that we actually had to replace roofs, replace structural members of roofs. So just an example of increased cost for by not staying up with our maintenance schedules. On the pipeline side, we've got examples of the mudlet force main where we were replacing some sections, went through a long period where we deferred a lot of those projects of the mudlet force main. We started again seeing breaks, and so the cost to replace under an emergency is much higher than replacing those under a planned project. Pleasant Oak, Maine, this is going a few years back, but back in the mid-2000s, the Pleasant Oak, Maine was rupturing, causing a lot of damage to schools and residences. So that was more of an emergency project that we eventually had to do. And then the last one, the El Dorado Hills Boulevard water main, this is a project, kind of a current deferral right now. We've had breaks. We have a large transmission main in El Dorado Hills Boulevard that runs the extent of El Dorado Hills Boulevard. Several breaks over the past few years. And this is not even included in our 5-year plan. We're just gonna essentially get by until we can afford to replace that. Next slide. All of the projects, we have about 130, 140 projects in our capital improvement plan. We assign a priority to each one to help us, you know, figure out the timing. Of course, priority 1 projects would address a health and safety issue or a regulatory mandate. Silver Lake Dam, 4 Bay Reservoir is an example. The majority, though, of our projects are priority 2. These are reliability, replacement of aging assets. And then priority 3, not a whole lot of projects in our plan for these, but these would be projects that may improve the efficiency or level of service for our customers. The 2 boxes down below, 99%, just almost all of the spending in our CIP is for either a priority 1 or priority 2 project. And almost all of the projects, we're just simply replacing existing assets, not increasing the capacity for future customers. We get that comment at times. Really, it's just replacing assets for existing customers. Developers pay for future increases in capacity. Next slide. Just a few more here. So this is transitioning into some of the major projects in the next 5 years. Silver Lake Dam replacement, our current estimate is about $50 million to replace Silver Lake Dam. The picture in the upper left is Silver Lake Dam back in, the picture I think was actually taken in 1920, but the dam was built in the 1870s. It was built originally as a timber crib dam, so think of Lincoln log type style of dam. And those timber crib members are still within the dam. The picture on the lower right is our existing dam today, and Highway 88 is right next to it. Those timbers have degraded over the years. We've had sinkhole develop and other reliability issues with that dam. Obviously, since 1870, it needs to be replaced. So that is scheduled for replacement in 2027, and we're currently working towards that. Next slide. The Sly Park Intertie, this is an important pipeline that was originally built in the 1970s. It's over a 20-inch pipeline. It really connects two of our treatment plants in Pollock Pines and Sly Park area. And this is really a project that would help us to replace this in times of drought, as well as if we have unplanned outages. We could shutter water between sources depending on the situation to improve the reliability, reduce outages, and the sort. We got a $10 million grant from the state to help fund this. And this project is in total about $30 million is our current estimate, and scheduled for construction in 2024. Next slide. I mentioned our water treatment plant improvements. Won't go too much more into detail there, but again, about $93 million between two of our water plants. We've got plans to replace certain facilities within our treatment plants at both El Dorado Hills and Reservoir One and Pollock Pines. But again, over the next 20 years, our condition assessment revealed that we need to spend about $370 million over the next 20 years. But we've only got about $90 million in the next 5 years planned. I mentioned storage tank replacement. We've got various storage tanks, both steel tanks as well as these floating cover reservoirs that we're planning to replace. We're also seeking grant opportunities where we can for these type of projects. Next slide. We like to continue our water line service line replacement, about $24 million over the next 5 years to replace leaking, failing service lines and water lines in our system. Next slide. On the wastewater side, similar type of facilities. We have pump stations that need to be upgraded, as well as pipeline replacement. And then my last slide, financing this capital improvement plan. So what the district does is for some of the large projects that I've mentioned here, we like to fund those through bond proceeds. We've got 2 bond issuances planned, one in 2024 and one in 2027, about $180 million between those 2 bond issuances. We also use rate revenue on an annual basis to pay for some of the smaller projects, and it helps offset some of our bonding needs. And then we also use facility capacity charges or hookup fees from developers can also be used to help fund some of these projects that I mentioned. Mentioned grants earlier too. We've been pretty successful with grants to help offset some of these costs. About $50 million have been awarded to the district for grants since 2020. Those would help pay for, again, for the Sly Park Intertie, some water line replacement. We also include backup generators in our system and some other smaller projects in Outingdale. And we also have been trying to harden our facilities from fire. So any of our facilities, like our flumes, our treatment facilities and the such, we've been doing hazard fuel reduction, and we're able to get some grants for those as well. And then we have about $40 million, just back one more slide, Jen, I'm almost done, and $40 million of pending grant applications. We'd like to continue to try to get grants for our Silver Lake Dam replacement that's upcoming. Flume replacement could qualify for grants as well in terms of wildfire risk reduction, our floating covered reservoirs, and then some other improvements in our recreation system. Okay, at this point, I am done, and then I'll hand it over to Jamie Bandy to talk about the cost of service study and the results of that.
A little bit shorter than Brian. Okay, thank you, Brian. Good morning. I'm Jamie Bandy, Director of Finance. And as Brian said, I'm going to go over a little bit more detail of the cost of service study itself and the results. Next slide, Jen. Okay, as Jim mentioned earlier in the presentation, the extensive outreach that we did do. What we have on the slides here is just kind of looking at our public meetings as well as our public workshops. So I'm going to go over this briefly. At the beginning of the year, we did come to the board with just sort of an overview of the cost of service, the requirements, what it was for, what the purpose of it was, and really what our guidelines within the analysis include. In February, we did contract with a consultant to do this study. And then in June, we really kind of came to the board with our first workshop. At that meeting, as Jim mentioned earlier, we did have a discussion with the board in terms of what are their priorities. And that's where the three priorities that were mentioned at the beginning really were established. And then in August, we brought to the board really the rate revenue requirements. So some of the analysis had already gone in, the data was collected, kind of looked at what services we had and really what were the cost of those services. And then what was the rate revenue that was required to fulfill those. As mentioned, we did bring to the board a couple of alternatives. So we brought the 12% alternative and really showed what that covered. We also, in terms of just thinking about the impacts on customers and really trying to keep that increase a little bit lower, we also brought a 9% alternative. At the time, what was presented, however, as Jim mentioned earlier, is the 9% increase really didn't meet some of the thresholds. We didn't meet our bond, our debt service requirements. We didn't meet our reserve targets. And some of the consequences to that, again, we are talking about doing some bond issuances to be able to pay for some of these projects, as Brian pointed out. If we're not able to meet those debt service requirements, that really lowers our, our bonding capacity. It lowers our risk rating, or it increases, our risk rating. And then with the 12% increase, we did show that we do meet the debt service requirements. We still aren't quite meeting the reserve targets fully. We would be deferring less critical projects, but still obviously deferring some of the projects. So again, what was presented in August was really the rate revenue requirements really showed us that we probably need an even higher increase than the 12%, but again, just thinking about the impacts to the customer and what could we balance moving forward. Again, in October, just mentioned again, looked at the financial plans. Late in October, the board did accept the cost of service analysis, and we issued the Prop 218 notice. And then really in November is when we held our public workshops to really start getting a little bit more feedback from the public. Next slide, Jen. So again, looking at the economic factors that are really influencing the need for the rate increases, we've obviously talked about this quite extensively, but really the aging infrastructure is probably the biggest impact. The increased capital and operating costs, and as we've all experienced in our personal lives, really just inflationary pressures, increased costs to almost everything that we experience. And then there on the slide, down at the bottom, those are just a couple of examples of how our costs have been increasing over the years. So the pipeline replacement costs, if you see at the bottom that El Dorado Road sewer main replacement, if you look back in 2017, it was about $1.5 million per mile. In 2019, that had already doubled to about $3 million per mile. And then if you look most recently at the Mother Lode sewer main replacement, we're up to $4 million per mile. Next slide, Jen. Here's another graph. I think this is really a really good visual of kind of what we've been looking at. So these essentially are the inflationary pressures over from 2010 to current. When we did our last cost of service study, we were developing those rates in 2019. If you look at the increases between 2010 to 2019, they were pretty steady. They were increasing each year, but really out of kind of a steady pace. And then if you look from 2020 to current, you see that they just significantly have raised and very quickly. Next slide, Jen. Okay, the next two slides are just kind of a graphic of what the methodology process was in order to do these studies. It is a very complex process. The information that needs to be collected and reviewed and analyzed. This chart and on the next slide also shows the wastewater methodologies, and these are in the final cost of service report if you wanted to take a little bit more detailed look at those. Next slide, Jen. Okay. So now looking at the numbers. So the financial plan, first we're going to look at the water utility. What I'd like to highlight here is looking at this in 2024, if you see the total revenue, $64.9 million, and then the total revenue requirements after the study is about 61.4. So in this case, looking again just at 2024, we do have about $3.5 million where we came in just slightly above what the revenue requirement is. However, there's still very little ability to use the rate revenue for projects. If we go to the next slide for wastewater, we see a little bit different picture here. So here our total revenue is about $30 million, which is coming in short of what the total revenue requirements are. So there at the bottom, you see that we're actually kind of running a negative. And essentially what this means, again, like I mentioned, we really are looking at trying to balance the best increases and the least amount of impact to the customers. When we decided to just look at a 3% increase for wastewater, knowing that's still a little bit low, but again, just kind of trying to find some flexibility in the impacts to customers. But what this means is that we're drawing from our reserves to be able to cover some of the projects on the wastewater side. Which we, again, on the water side, we're not able to do that because the reserves are already too low. Okay, next slide, Jen. Now scaling it back down a little bit more specifically to our customers, and really what does this mean to you for your bi-monthly bills? So the first graphic we have here is looking at the bi-monthly for our lowest user customers. The proposed rate changes for 2024, just for the water side, again, this is just the increase from 23 to 24. For a water customer, for their bi-monthly bill is about $13 bi-monthly, so we're really looking at about $6.50 per month for the water-only customer. Next slide, Jen. And this graph here is really kind of showing our average use customer, and that's about 2,600 cubic feet is what we use to calculate these. So again, for the bi-monthly, it's about $16 or about $8 monthly would be the impact with the proposed 12% rate increase to these customers. Next slide. And then lastly, this is just the high use customers. So again, water only for next year, about a $21 increase bi-monthly or about $10.5 monthly to the customer. Okay, and again, just kind of reiterating the slide, we saw this at the beginning of the presentation. So again, just looking at our regional comparisons with other agencies. EID is really below average currently and remains just slightly below that even with the proposed increases. And then lastly, this is the wastewater regional comparison. In the wastewater world, if you see the green dotted line going vertical, we have what's called a secondary treatment or tertiary treatments. Really, it's just kind of what goes into processing the water. Tertiary treatment plants do cost more. And so again, kind of looking at where EID falls within the regional comparisons, we are still in that lower third of our neighbors. And with that, I'm actually going to go ahead and hand it back over to Jim to finish up the rest of our presentation.
Just a handful of slides of maybe only 3.
Thank you, Jamie.
Going back to the balancing priorities, if you look at it, there's 3 that the board gave us direction on: affordability, rate stability, and infrastructure reliability. If you look at the couple alternatives we have, it certainly meets the 9% is better meeting the affordability to our customers. The 12% is slightly higher. But the 9% really doesn't help in rate stability, and I'll explain. When you kick the can down the road and move 90 to 100 million into 2029 cost of service study, one, the project's going to be more expensive, and you're putting that on top of existing projects that need to be done. So you're going to have much larger increases in '29 if the board decides to go with a lower rate. The 12% rate increase certainly meets the infrastructure requirements. We can replace the assets that are getting old and need replacement. The 9% really doesn't. Again, it kicks the can down the road. So we believe, staff believes, that the best thing to do is proceed with the 12% rate increase, even though it's more impactful to our customers. It doesn't delay what is needed to do by EID to maintain a safe, reliable water service. Next slide. I won't go through this again. This is what we just talked about. There's pluses and minuses on both. And then the next slide, this is the actual protest rate. According to Prop 218, you need 50% plus one to have it fail. In this case, remarkably, we only had about a 0.5% protest rate. And going back to my dinner the other night with some Marshall board members and some other community members, the word I heard was, no one likes the 12% increase, but we certainly understand you need to replace assets over time. So we just understand you proceeding with it. Now, I'm certain there's a lot of disagreement in the room, but you can see that it's less than 1%. In fact, it's one of the lowest protest rates we've had at the district when we were proposing rate increases. So with that, next slide, please. So staff's recommendation is to accept the cost of service study and adopt the resolution approving the increases and changes to rates reflected in the notice. Take other action as directed by the board and take no action. We're recommending option one. Please note, if the board does accept the study and pass that resolution, each year they look at the budget and look at the revenue requirements and the project list, and they can elect to implement a lower rate, and they have in the past. Not often, but occasionally, they'll actually reduce the proposed rate increases in future years based on the current status, and they certainly have that option going forward. But you can't exceed the adopted rate study. That concludes the report. President Faircamp.
Thank you, Jim. I'd ask right now what the board pleasure is. Do you want to ask clarifying questions of the presentation before we do public, or you want public input first?
I think we need to have a vote on the motion before public comment.
Yeah, I'll move option one.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a
I'll
motion.
second.
We have a motion and a second for option one. At this point now, we will questions and comments of directors, and then we'll open to the public. Director Day.
If I may, there we go. I'll make a alternative motion, and we can discuss it all at the same time. The move option two, which is, and I'll preface it, nearly an 80% increase in El Dorado irrigation water rates is too much too fast. An average of 12.3% a year, compounded over 5 years, is proposed. And my belief, my concern is that between PG&E and EID, it is making living and working in our beautiful El Dorado County unsustainable and unaffordable, especially for retirees hoping to stay here, young families hoping to move here, our schools, our local businesses, including Apple Hill, our tree farms, and our wonderful wineries. The projects the increases would pay for are worthwhile. But instead of trying to get them all done over the next 5 years, we should and could be spreading them out over a longer period of time. The sky would not fall if we do that. The investment in infrastructure is still there, but the rate increases, while still being high at 8% a year, would be a little more manageable for our residents, schools, businesses, and the ag community, compared to the devastating annual 12.3% rate increases. Therefore, I move that both base charges and commodity charges for single-family residential, multifamily, commercial, landscape and rec turf, agriculture, irrigation with and without residents, and small farms be reduced down to the rate increase of 8% per year for each year 2024 through 2028. All of the rate changes in option 1 would remain as proposed. And that we direct staff to make the necessary adjustments to the budget and capital improvement plan to reflect these rates. Thank you.
And I will second it.
All right, so we have a competing motion then for option 2, as explained by Director Day. So we have both of those on the table, and at this point, we will open to public for public input. Jen will take comments from people in the room first. So if you would like to make a comment, please come up, voluntarily state your name for the record. Good morning.
Good morning. I noticed that the
Can you please state your name for the record? if you don't
Lyle
mind?
Curry.
Lyle Curry.
The county's website shows that there's a median income for the county, a household of 2, is about $83,000 per year. I don't know that, I don't know how, I think, I'm going to guess that there's maybe 1 or 2% in this room that could afford a 76% increase over the 5-year as proposed. So I would hope that you would give discussion and credence to Mr. Day's presentation and suggestions.
Thank you, sir. Please come on up. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Thomas Lewis, Lewis. I actually wanted to speak in support of the expenditures as laid out under the 12% plan. But I actually disagree with you, Commissioner Day. The reason, but I am disappointed that we are at this point where we see rusting storage tanks, that we have pipelines that are rusting, and we have to have emergency repairs. I don't know how long either any of you board members have been on the board, or the engineer, or whatever have been in your position. But it seems to me that we should have been properly addressing these problems to prevent these issues. Having rusted pipelines is unforgivable. You can actually plan and do mitigation of that. The next part that I would ask is on these grants that are so helpful in deferring or mitigating these expenses, I question whether we have actually probed the possible areas of getting grants. As we know, in the Inflation Reduction Act, there was substantial funding for infrastructure improvements. The state has also been putting forth a lot of money to prevent forest fire and wildfire problems that we have faced over the past 2 years. I wonder whether the district has sought out consultants to find out whether you are actually pursuing all of the grant possibilities. There were a few things in the graphs that I was also concerned about. Some of them were rather minor, but some of them were significant. In the common labor graph that the CFO showed, and I found her presentation very illuminating, it showed that the common labor expenditures have zoomed Now, I don't know if you on the board have questioned that, but it seems to me that, yes, although we have had increased costs of labor, that we have to look at alternatives, such as seeking out subcontractors to mitigate the amount of labor that we have within the district. Secondly, I don't know if you noticed, but the hydroelectric income that we're using, that we're generating, is flat for 5 years. Why is that? We know PG&E is charging us more and more. So I question whether or not we're getting sufficient sources for grants. We're looking at our own expenditures within the district, such as labor, and how much we're getting for our hydroelectric. But we really do need to do the preventative measures. And yes, we probably need to bite the bullet because we haven't paid in the past. And we are thus suffering for having rusty storage tanks and leaking pipelines, which is absolutely unforgivable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Hello, my name is Walt Thompson. If you don't already know me,
Hi, Walt.
you should remember me. You will after today. Okay, first off, the public input. There's
Mr.
no
Thompson?
notice- There's no notice of the last raises that you did last 5 years. So how much was the raise this year on water rates? The last time you guys did this was like 55%, I believe. Right? Where did that money go? All right? No history. I'd like to know what the history was the whole time since George Osborne has been a board member. Is I don't know any time this board's ever not passed a raise. So I would like this to be your first time. Okay? So the brochure that you got out, that you put out, put like average rate of 12%, but nobody totals it up to 80%. But Alan Day did, and I found that the other day, okay? But at the last meeting Thursday, when I got up and said it was a 62%, nobody corrected me and told me it was really 80%. That would have been a nice thing to know because I could have put that out a lot more, and you got a lot more protest letters. And you didn't count the protest letters you got today. Okay, and every protest letter you got, I'm sure there's 100 more out there that would have protested, at least. So I wish you consider that, and I would consider that you be honest with your publications on how much money you're talking. Number one is you should be allowed only one raise for every 5 years. So if you want to justify this, put the rate out for one raise, whatever that is, okay? Now, all this nice deal, I want to get back to the projects. How many employees do the EID have? How many backhoes do you have? How many excavators you have? How many 10-wheel dump trucks you got? Okay, how many miles of water line could you replace if you put all those guys to work for a week? You have one frigging crew out there replacing water lines. Scheduled. As I assume that you have enough money to cover the payroll, the salaries, and the upkeep of all the equipment that you have and employees. But I don't see a schedule of what they're doing. So I think you need to go back and reschedule this. So your water line replacement of 25 million should be done in-house, zero cost. No more increase. You're already covering those people. The water storage tank, as you mentioned, look at the rust on that. How old is that rust on that tank? They're falling apart. How old is the Golden Gate Bridge? Is it made out of steel? You know why? Because they maintain it. They paint it. They never stop painting. So you got in-house people. You need to put them out there sandblasting and painting them tanks. You don't need any more money to do that. And you got $30 million to do that. I think you need to go back to every one of these projects and look at it. The Silver Lake Dam, okay? That supposedly noted that thing is like 2015 that it's falling apart. Instead, you replace the forebay, you put a pipeline into the deal, you replace concrete. Okay, let's, I think you need to prioritize what you need. So until you replace the Silver Fork Dam and have an actual design and a cost, and you ask for federal grant money, because I would think you could get federal grant money for at least half of that. With the Oroville disaster, I'm sure that people will pay attention to that. Okay, if you lose that dam and it comes down Silver Fork and wipes out Kybers and Silver Lake and all that, how much money is that going to cost you? Exactly, right? So, okay, let's replace the Silver Lake Dam. You don't need to upgrade the treatment plant. You don't need to upgrade, put the canal. You don't need to do any work from Silver Lake down to that treatment center. You don't need the Slag Park transfer pipe. It's $30 million because you don't have any water to transfer. Because you don't have the dam, you don't have any water coming down that. You just lost 1/3 of your supply. So I would think that might be a priority. Might want to hear more about that. Because I put it on the news that the Silver Fork Dam is going to collapse. I think you'll probably get the message then. Okay? So you need to go reduce all those projects from that down and put them on hold. So you need that. Okay? That's just a start of it. The other way is alternatives of lower costs. That pipe from the transfer pipe from the two stations, that's what size pipe is that? Okay, can that be lined instead of dug up and replaced? Or can you put a smaller pipe into it? You guys have no details of exactly what these projects are, what their costs, what the alternatives are. You need to go back to each project and come up with a lower cost. How can you reduce the cost of doing this? I prefer that you guys put this thing down, but I would accept that you defer your decisions on passing this raise increase until you go back and detail each project you got and reduce the price down, and we have an open discussion to the public on each one of these projects. And I know you guys know this is not right. 80% increase is not right. If you guys can't balance the budget and you need an 80% deal, then I think you should put an immediate freeze on any hiring of EID, any raise hires, any additional cost of supplies without approval. In other words, tighten the belt. Start using your people that you got and quit contracting it out. Quit borrowing money. Don't borrow any more money if you can't pay the bond now. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Walt. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Phyllis McGee. I'm part of the agricultural community here, and I just have a couple of questions. I definitely agree that a rate increase needs to happen, but my feeling is the agricultural community is taking a larger hit. Um, I'm wondering if the agricultural rate was lowered a bit, how much of an impact would that be to the overall increase? For example, it was mentioned that the average income is $80,000. So per month, the household might have an increase of $8 or $10. My net income is probably that or less per year by the time everything is figured out, and yet it's going to be costing me $80 to $100 a month. So I feel that it's a little bit disproportionate in terms of what ag is being charged. I understand we use more water, but that's just a question that I have. How would that look? And is there a possibility that that could be decreased for the ag community? Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis.
I just want to remind folks that please talk into the microphone so the folks that weren't able to attend in person have the benefit of your public comments.
Good morning.
Check, check, 1, 2.
Good.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board. My name is Michael Friend-Placer.
Morning, Michael.
It's my first time coming before EID, attending a meeting. I have to say, as a customer of over 40 years, the water has always been delicious, the service has been reliable, and makes some of the finest beer in the country, frankly.
I figured you'd get to that.
Yeah, I'd get to that straight away. I want to agree with a number of the comments made from some of the previous speakers. First, I agree that the rate requested is way too much too fast, okay? And when you do calculate it out, it is approaching nearly 80%. I was pleased to hear Mr. Day's second motion, which would be my second option. My first option would be to table this motion and defer for additional study, as a previous speaker mentioned. I think the whole issue of cost analysis and how can we save costs, and I think, you know, subcontracting was mentioned as one, equipment and so on and so forth. Those are all worthy comments that I think the board should in fact consider. Rate increases are inevitable, okay? And I think that we can all agree that some form of rate increase at some point with some schedule that we can live with is appropriate. But we're being hammered, whether it's PG&E or sewage or anything else. I'm down to the point where I can only afford money for guns and gasoline, and you can pass it on to Governor Newsom for me. But truthfully, it is incredibly difficult. I am recently now on a fixed income. I'm not whining or complaining. Woe is me. But in terms of public policy, what is reasonable? Last week at the Placerville City Planning Commission, we had a landlord of a very major shopping center come before us and give a impassioned discussion on just how difficult the business environment actually really is, both for big and small businesses. I think it's public knowledge that the Rite Aid has gone into bankruptcy and that store may close. I think the same might be true for Office Max up the road, and smaller businesses are having trouble. We have to be absolutely conscious and cognizant of what the impacts of these small but cumulative increases do to people. So I would urge your board to really come back and look at the numbers I heard in the presentation. If I understood correctly, a lot of the major facilities have about 33% of life expectancy left. Okay, well, this is the time certainly to begin planning on how we're going to upgrade and fix and repair and replace. Get that completely. I think some of the criticism about, you know, why are we here is probably legitimate. I'm not laying it at anybody's feet here, but I'm just saying as a governing board, as fiduciaries, you know, you need to keep that in mind and how do we do things better. So I hope you give that some consideration. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning.
Morning. Hi, my name's Stacy Standel, and I've lived in El Dorado County for 40-plus years. I really appreciate your time in putting this together.
Maybe a little closer, yeah.
Sorry, and
That's
thank
right.
you, Mr. Day. I really appreciated your comments on that. I feel the same, that it's just too much too fast. I'm a realtor here in El Dorado County, and I see the incredible impact, all the rate increases on everything, like we're saying, PG&E, and even like fire insurance. The cost of living here is crazy. I deal with young buyers and retired folks, and they can hardly make it. So we have to keep that into consideration. We don't want all the good people leaving, right? I'm not an anti-growther, but my concern is there's another 400,000 houses, not 400,000, 400 houses being built in the heritage community in El Dorado Hills. There's lots more development, lots more people, lots more demand on our water system happening right now. So it's hard on us that have been here for a long time getting these rate increases, and then we've got people moving in and more demand and whatnot. Seems a little bit unfair. So my story, living here for as long as I have, the home we're living in now, we've been there for 22 years. I tried to get the small farm ag rate, went through all the hoops. Sorry, I'm so nervous. Went through all the hoops to get that, bought all the trees, did the thing, had the lady come out, only to have the whole thing reneged after 1 year because they changed the rules. So I got my water rate was down to $100, which was lovely. I've got some fruit trees. Of course, they were baby trees. And then I was told, oh no, now your trees have to be full grown and you have to be able to sell and produce, I can't remember if it's $2,500 or $3,500 a year in produce. Well, that takes a good 5 to 10 years to get your trees producing to that. I would have liked to have gotten to that level, but I lost my small farm ag rate. Now, you know, this is like 10 years later, my water bill this summer was $925. So I have some fruit trees, I have a little garden, we have a pool. We've always had the pool. Nothing's changed. So I've got everything on timers and drippers. It is hard. I'm trying to be, you know, sustainable, trying to live here. Got a few chickens. We live just outside the city limits in the county. Nothing's exorbitant. It's my husband and myself. We don't have 20 children. There's not anything else going on there. So it's frustrating. I'm trying to imagine, how are we going to retire and be able to stay in this community that we love and be able to afford it? Because we can't, it feels a little bit like a bait and switch with the nice lady that talked about the 12% and the rate going up maybe $21 a month. Well, when I'm looking at this, if I'm paying $925 a month for water, if that's doubling, how am I going to pay $1,800 a month? That's crazy. I mean, it's a bi-monthly thing, but still, added on to everything else, how will we ever be able to retire? So I just ask that you would consider slowing this down. I appreciate all the other comments of people just taking a little more time to think this through and do this in a more appropriate fashion where it's manageable for the people. I understand that things are rotten and falling down, and I can't speak to that. I don't know where the mismanagement happened. I sit on an HOA board that didn't take care of things before I got on there, and I understand those were things out of your control, mismanagement somewhere else. I totally understand that things have to be done, that it has to be done appropriately. And again, not to freak the people out. It's hard for people to show up at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, too, to be here and be present. So that is another thing to consider. I had a lot of people, I posted this all over my social media. Please be here. Please listen. Please be involved. They can't. They're working. So anyway, thank you again. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Bless you. Good morning, Rich.
How you doing, Brian? My name is Richard Aspenleiter. I understand the need for increase.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay,
Rich.
there you go.
You almost got to eat the darn thing.
Okay. All right. I do understand the need for an increase. Everything's getting expensive these days. Of the two options, I would go with the Mr. Days. It seems too much too fast anyways. Either one does, but do understand the need for it. I was going to complain about the fact that I have two parcels, one with a meter, one without, so I only got one vote. It seems like nobody really voted anyway, so it didn't really begin to matter in this case. But to have another meter that will be affected soon, you know, it will impact me again. So anyways, that was I don't know if there is a way to calculate potential customers, that will be affected by it, because we had no voice, at least some of them didn't. So anyways, that's my comment. So, thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Anybody else in the room like to speak? Sir,
I
let's,
would
let's
like-
let, let's let the others that have not spoke first.
Sure.
I'm going to call upon it one more time, and then we'll let him have one more, and then we'll go to the, what's that?
Sue Taylor,
Yeah, you'll have to
I'll
speak
try that.
into
Does
it,
that,
Sue, yeah.
it just doesn't seem like it's working.
Yeah.
I'm eating it. I don't know why it's like it's not on.
No, we can hear you.
You can
but
hear me? Just
yeah,
yell?
Yeah, well, almost.
Okay, well, I'm not as optimistic, and I don't feel the need to do this because I've been through this so many times. My family had a small farm, like family farm. We built our own water line, and we then annexed into EID, and were promised domestic water rates, and those were taken away. And that was during a time, I think you lost about 1,000 small farms with EID's actions. And last I heard, you're down to about 300 to 400. And I feel like this is going to put the nail in the coffin for small ag businesses, which is really sad. We live right below the Sierra Nevada mountains where all the water comes from. We're first passage of this water. This water should be allowed to flow over our lands, keep them water, fire resistant. But instead, EID keeps capsulating and sending that water somewhere else, and not allowing those that need that water in their areas for ponds and different things for fire protection. It's being excluded because of costs to fill those ponds and areas and ditches that were stolen. I helped the Pollock Pines group trying to prevent EID from doing what they did in Pollock Pines, removing their historic water ditches and the forebay. That's a $40 million project that you did there. When, as a gentleman says, you've got Silver Lake that's collapsing, but yet you spent that money on the objection of an entire community that begged you not to do it. And now all their forests, their trees are dying. They're becoming a huge fire hazard area. And I'll take the liberty, I was talking to one of them, and they mentioned that to the representative for that area, and he told him that's just progress. So you may want to correct that, and I thought he would be here to bring that up himself. But I just, it's pretty well known in this county, if you want to slip something horrible, you do it between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and most likely the last hearing of the year. And to say that we only had a percentage, you need 20,000 protest letters. And the way you put it in here is so complicated that nobody would even know how to send you a letter. Somebody begged me to do something. I did it like on Friday. We knew when this came out it was hopeless to even challenge it because of, you show all the dates and all the meetings and all the times, but if you really look at them, you put that letter out in October, but you had your first workshop in November, and you want the whole public to be able to address this. They're not aware that you're increasing their rates 80% in the next 5 years. Maybe a lot of you can afford that, but there's much more in this county that can't. And these are just base water rates, and I don't understand the $16 a month when in here it says it's $69 for the residential monthly rate is around $69. So I don't know how you say you go from $16 a month to something that's still less than what you're publishing as the bi-monthly rate. It's also, most of this is disingenuous, and it's almost offensive when you have every meeting that when the government increases rates, you have to say how much you notified the public. And then you talk about your small groups, one person you talk to, or the small groups of people that you associate with that are very well off, and they don't associate with the people that are going to struggle with this. The bond credit. I've always heard EID brag about your great bond credit rate, but the reason it's so great is because the lenders know that it's impossible for the public to challenge an increase, and that EID has no debt cap, no ceiling, and that you can keep spending and causing debt without any challenge. and because they know that, they're willing to give you as much money as you want. And then you talked about not doing capacity, and maybe I'm incorrect, but it's just from my observation. I saw Mother Lode, you're increasing sewer lines from 8 inches to 20 inches, and I don't know how that's not capacity building. And also, if that's sewer pipes, how much water is it going to take to get that sewer to move? That's a lot of water, and maybe you need to correct me, but that's just, I dug through documents and I can't find an understanding of that. And then, you know, in the past, most of this sewer and water infrastructure was built for El Dorado Hills. I think around that time, it put us in about $350 million of debt. And the water meters for El Dorado Hills was supposed to pay that debt. We're still carrying that debt. And I looked up your debt. In 2022, we're up to $406 million. In 23, somehow we got down to $391 million. But in 2024, we're going to $426 million. And by 27, we're going to be up to $425 million of debt. That debt is killing this county. And the horrifying thing is EID has no debt cap. You can keep spending and justifying, but it still doesn't stop. And I just, and also I noticed on your drinking system, you didn't show the drinking water that we're also providing in Folsom. When I brought that up, when it first was happening, everyone did the denial that we're not giving water to Folsom when it's clearly known that you do. And I think you need to add that to your drinking system chart for the public. And I think I covered most of my frustrations. I appreciate Alan Day for trying to mitigate this increase that just seems absurd. And I think you need to be very careful about increasing debt and on the back of the existing rate payers. And stop and Taylor. Sue Taylor. I'm on record. And then I guess the last thing, I was pretty impressed that we had a dam that lasted 153 years with logs. And you should know that most of downtown Placerville is built on logs, by the way. So that's not, you might want to bring them back and see how they can reconstruct this for probably not much money and last us another 153 years. But anyway, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, for folks in the audience, please, and we're going to just limit to one comment. So thank you for trying, sir. You already did, so we're going to limit it at this point. We have people online as well, I think, who wants to talk, so. Or the board pleasure. Do you want to hear him again or no?
Absolutely, let him talk.
Well, I got a split.
Make the call, boss.
We'll give you 1 minute.
Oh, I don't even need that long.
Okay.
I wanted to make a couple of suggestions. First of all, the real estate lady mentioned about the Thomas Lewis, about the increased number of houses. I don't know if we can increase the hookup costs for these new houses, but obviously they're going to have an impact on your infrastructure, our infrastructure. So look at also Mr. Thompson mentioned about the dam and federal monies as far as being able to get the federal government. You know, we had the problem with Lake Oro and looking at those sources. Finally, I would ask also the CFO, if we went from a bi-monthly billing to a monthly billing, that should generate you actually some more income. So please look at ways of increasing income and grant income.
All right, thank you very much. Jen, can we please go online? And then we'll take a break and we'll answer some questions.
Mr. Smith, are you still there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jeff Smith, and I appreciate all the work that goes into having us have safe and reliable drinking water and the wastewater facilities kept up to date. I do want to comment, though, that there could be some other options to look at cost and look at how we can reduce costs. I don't know if all the projects need to be done in the 5-year period. It is just like I'm in response to Director Day's motion to look at option 2. I think it's just too much too soon. There's other projects that could probably be delayed to it be a 7 or 8 year. And I don't think Brian, when he's presenting it, said you could finish all the projects anyway. Also, there's other, probably restructuring your bond debt, things that could be looked at to reduce cost to keep our rates down to minimum. The challenge is that right now I saw the materials cost that Jamie presented going up substantially. But that was over the 21-22 period. We have this anomaly of this inflation, which is extremely high. Right now, we're going into more of an economic downturn where you might have more opportunities to negotiate lower prices for things, for items, for materials, for labor. And it could not be as big of an issue if we went with a lower percentage than 5 years down the road. So my suggestion is that we, it's going to be, I think, look at it as a balancing act between what's affordable and I'll be honest with you, 12% raise, 17% commodity charge in the first year for water is just too much. It's like less than a quarter of what our incomes increase. It's just, and with all the other increases, it's just going to cause hardship on El Dorado County families. So if we could look at containing costs and try and keep that down to a minimum, look at opportunities in the next 5 years where I don't think the economy is going to go like it did in 21 and 22. I think there could be the 9% could meet our needs, or the 8%. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
Andy?
Yep. Hi, this is Andy Nevis, Shingle Springs resident. And, I spoke at one of the workshops and I mentioned, the need to really, you've done obviously your cost of service analysis. That's what Prop 218 is all about. But you also need to look at the ability of residents to pay and then actually, try to balance those out. I'm not sitting here with a specific recommendation on which path you go forward. I think that unfortunately and this, by the way, this conversation is happening all across the state. I happen to work in water policy and this is, we're seeing these really drastic increases in many, many communities across the state. But I do think that the board should keep in mind, the impact that this is going to have on the county's ability to, provide reasonably affordable housing. This gets, even though your board doesn't have direct jurisdiction over it, this definitely, just compounds with the issues we're having with fire insurance and other costs of, even food going up. So I just encourage you to keep that in mind as you're doing your decision. And I also understand that Prop 218 in this hearing today is really setting a cap for how much the rates can go up over the next few years. And so really, regardless of the decision that you come to today, I would encourage you to, redouble your efforts. Let's make 2024 a year of really sharpening the pencil and seeing where maybe we could bring down some of the costs a little bit, bring in non-rate revenue, and hopefully make next year's increase a little bit less than is currently forecasted. I also think my understanding is that there's a state bond that's likely to go on the ballot. Next year, it'll be negotiated through the legislature. I would really encourage EID, along with other mountain counties, to be really aggressive in that and trying to get funding for our region. My concern is that other counties will be seen, more urban counties will, as tends to happen, take up the vast majority of the money. But we need to really advocate for ourselves as the source watershed that we need that investment. Unfortunately, it is true. We're coming to the end of life on a lot of our infrastructure, and that has to be replaced for us to have reliable water service. But we do just have to, it's painful. And I don't envy the 5 of you who have to make this tough decision. But, once again, I would, as you're making your decision, just make sure you're balancing not just the cost of service study, but also the ability of residents to pay. And then let's make 2024 the year of trying to bring down the rate increases for the out years. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Andy.
Ruth Carter.
Hi there, Ruth Carter, City of Placerville, also on El Dorado County Farm Trails. And I wanted to take a minute and just ask the board if they would delay this conversation until March. Many people were unaware of, as Michael Friend had pointed out, and Sue and Andy, that the timing has been short in letting the public know. I think the reason that we have such a low protest rate is not because people are for this increase, of course. This is going to be devastating to many households and small farms especially. But this is something that really needs to be daylighted to the public better. This is too short a time period around the holidays. And this time of year, you know, people are going to visit family and do other things. The priorities are different. And they may not be aware of how much of an increase we're talking about here. So I think that public awareness is key, and I would ask that you table this to the spring. The current maintenance practices of EID need to be revisited. While it's evident that regular maintenance and upgrades are essential for ensuring a reliable water supply, it's important to make sure that these practices are efficient and cost effective. Looking at alternative ways that we can save money and like others have said, sharpening the pencil are crucial to the longevity of EID and helping our El Dorado County residents be able to live in our beautiful county. And the transparency of the decision-making process regarding the rate increases is vital. The community deserves a clear understanding of how these decisions are made and the factors that are considered and how the funds are allocated. And a reevaluation would ensure that these processes are transparent and justifiable. Thank you for your time, and we appreciate your consideration.
Thank you very much.
President Veerkamp, it does not appear there are any additional members of the public online. I will do one last call here. If any members of the public participating online are wishing to speak, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. If you don't have them handy, then if you are participating via computer, you just hover to the bottom of the screen there, and there'll be a little raise hand icon. You click on that. It will notify us on this side that you are wanting to speak. If you are participating via phone only or by both, you can do a *9 on your keypad, and it will notify us here on this end that you're wishing to speak. So I know that some of you may be scrambling to figure out how to do it, so we'll just pause for a second here and see if there are any members of the public online additional wishing to speak. President Veerkamp, it does not appear there are any additional members of the public wishing to speak online. If you are asking for a break, I do ask that we answer some of the questions prior to taking that break.
Okay, that's fine. I may have to get up and take my own little break. But that's on me. But so we can go ahead and then move into some answers to questions. Jim, I'm assuming, George?
Yes, thank you, President. Two comments to Mrs. Taylor's
George,
comments.
hang on a second. Hang on a second. Let's get some questions answered before the
That's why
board members
I'm
comment.
going to respond to a couple of points that I think is important.
Okay, if you don't mind, let's let staff respond first. And I believe
Okay,
Jim
all
wrote
right,
down a bunch, and if I've got a list. If Jim doesn't get them all, we'll refer them to Jim or you or any of the other board members at that time. Jim, would you please?
Great, thank you. There was some discussion about using subcontractors to do the work. And a lot of our major projects, we go out to competitively bid, and we're required to take the lowest responsible bid, so we get the best price possible for our customers. So we do a lot of contracting to get the work done. We do not have the staff in-house to do these major projects. You know, we have one crew that does service line replacement. You know, we just don't have the staff to do it, so that's why we go out to contracting. There was a comment about grants. If you could pull up slide 33, it will show the grants we've received over the last 5 years. We're reviewing what's that called? The infrastructure, the one that Biden just passed. What was the name of that?
Inflation
Reduction
Reduction Act, which only drove it higher.
We did just a cursory look at it, and there may be some possibility to get some grant, especially in vegetation management. Most of it's green energy, green cars, all that stuff. But we do look at that, and we'll look at to see if we can apply and get grants. We've already put in grants, and maybe I'll ask Brian to come up about Silver Lake Dam. We put in some requests for that. We'll see if we're going to be successful. I'll wait until you do that one first. Silver Lake Dam grants.
Yeah, so I highlighted some of the grants, but yeah, Silver Lake Dam, obviously, that's a big upcoming cost. We have applied for about $5 million of what's available. There's a $5 million cap on a Department of Energy. That's a federal grant from the Department of Energy for dam safety. And we're hoping there'd be more, we're continuing to look for more with the Infrastructure and Jobs Act as we go forward. There's, used to be for dam regulatory required dam safety projects, there wasn't any grant funding from federal or state, but it seems like lately that's freed up some more, so we'll continue to look at those.
Don't go away, there may be some more. There was a question on generation with PG&E's costs and retail rates going up significantly. That doesn't necessarily transpose to wholesale rates, especially with the glut of solar power out there. We did our best to negotiate a wholesale contract with Pioneer. This year, we're budgeting, I think, $3.5 million, and we're going to come in a little bit north of $5 million in revenue. But the wholesale market's very, very competitive. Most of the costs that you're seeing in PG&E's rates are on the retail side, and a lot of that's the undergrounding. Whether you agree with that or not, that's where a lot of their costs are coming from. There is a question about last rate increase. Last rate increase was 5 years. I think it started in 20 and went to 25. It was 5% a year. If you could go, Jen, to slide 37. For the cost of service between 2020 to 2025, we use either 2018 or 2019 data to be able to forecast what our revenue requirements are. If anybody projected that we're going to see, 140% increases, 80% increases, you're a better forecaster than us. So the rate increases proposed in 2020 were at 5 years of 5. And then when we got hammered with the inflation, we decided we just can't continue that way, so we proposed this cost of service increase. The other option that came up, or the other thing that we found out, is when we did the critical asset management on our treatment plants, they said you better start working on them now. It's a 20-year program. Phase it in over 20 years. Don't try and do it in a 5-year period. And that's why part of the CIP is higher. And we'll pull up the list of projects that we're going to fund or plan to fund in a minute. Number of employees, we have 230 employees.
Down from 330.
Yeah, I mean, back in 2020, I think it was 2009, we had 330 employees, and we're down to about 230 right now. Silver Lake Dam, we talked about, intertie, replacing that versus lining it. We looked at that as well. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, we looked at, it's a steel pipeline, for those that know, that with no interior lining, so it's rusted over time, and it's been out of service since, I believe, 2013. We have looked at various structural or non-structural lining repairs for that, but when you look at the cost of those versus just replacing the pipe, replacing the pipe became more favorable. So it was just a cost-benefit type of analysis we did for that.
Moving on, there's comment on us giving away water to Folsom. That's a false statement. We do have about 500 homes in our service area. That is across the border in Sacramento, but it's within our service territory. We are selling them retail water to about 500 homes, but we're not selling any to the city of Folsom.
Jim, did they also pay hookup?
They're paying full hookup fees, everything else.
Okay, thank you.
The domestic irrigation rate that was referred to in the last cost of service study, I think it was in 2010, it was a closed system, meaning no one else could join in. And our legal folks said, you know, you can't have a rate that some customers have that no one else could get in. It was illegal. So we got rid of that rate, and most of them either went to single-family residential or into small farms. The main ditch wasn't 40 million. Oops, she just left. It wasn't 40 million, it was $15 million expenditure, and it saved a significant amount of water. I think it was in the 1,800 acre feet a year, which is a number that we wanted to conserve water ourselves before the state mandated all of you had to conserve it. So if we have some leaky pipes or leaky ditches, let's fix our own house first before the state mandates come out and force everybody else to reduce their water. Mother lode force main from 10 to 20.
Yeah, I had that note. See, there was a comment about, you know, not all of our projects are for existing customers. We do upsize. On the Mudload Forest Main, this is the pipeline that we've been installing, replacing in Mudload Drive, Pleasant Valley Road. It's true that it's a 12-inch pipeline that we're replacing with an 18 or 20-inch pipeline. The primary benefit of that is just more increased pumping efficiency. It's a pumped line, so increasing the size a bit allows greater efficiency in pumping wastewater to where it needs to be.
Okay, if you could pull up cost of service number 7, please. As we're talking about potentially that all the substitute motion, I want to just share with you the list of projects that would be impacted by reducing our borrowing. Okay, Silver Lake Dam, it's a regulatory requirement, $50 million. We really don't have a choice on that one. Sly Park Intertie, we could not do that one, although we'd lose a $10 million grant. For a $30 million project and a third of it's paid for by somebody, I think it'd be ridiculous for us not to do that project. Water treatment plant asset replacement, $93 million in it for the next 5 years. It provides safe drinking water and service reliability. I would prefer not to cut that, but the bulk of that is in El Dorado Hills. We can certainly cut that project out, and hopefully it lasts for a while. Storage tank replacement and rehab. You saw one of those tanks. Customers really don't like us not to have tanks maintained well. We can cut that out. And one gentleman said it's appalling to see assets in this condition. Well, we can only replace assets or fix them if we have the revenue to do it. We could cut that out. So there's the $100 million I talked about if we had to go with the substitute motion. Water line replacement and service line replacement. We're far behind what they call American Water Works Association national standards. We have more outages and longer outages than most similar utilities. We could cut that out. The problem there is then we'll have line breaks and we have to go out there on an emergency basis, and it costs just 3 to 4 times the amount to replace it. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but we could certainly cut that out. And then we had projects on flume, I think one flume in there, the small flume Brian talked about, and rehab a tunnel. We had a tunnel fail, geez, was that about 5 years ago? Yeah, 2014, and it cost an ungodly amount of money to go in there and clean the tunnel out. But that's a project we could certainly consider removing. But if we're going with the substitute motion, I'd probably look at eliminating the water treatment plant and the storage tanks. And then in 4 or 5 years ago, from now, when we do another cost of service study, you guys can come over here and tell me that we should be maintaining our tanks and our treatment plants. That concludes.
Okay, Jim, if you don't mind, I had a couple more, and I'm assuming board members do as well.
Sure.
Can
The base-
can we take a break since we answered some of the questions? Can we take a quick,
Sure, that's fine. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 5 after 11.
we're not closing the meeting. We will just mute the meeting and mute the camera. We're not closing, and we will be back by 11:05.
3? Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and continue on with our meeting with our questions relative to item 16, the cost of service study. I do have a few more that I think we can elaborate on, but I want to get to the directors first. I can go last. Director Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. President. A couple of comments about the pipeline in Pollock Pines. Besides the 1,800 acre feet of water we were losing, I had very, very reliable information that when meth labs were being operated, their residue was being dumped in that ditch. And I talked to ex-Sheriff DiAugustini, and I was very concerned that chemicals, drugs, illicit drugs, if they were chasing somebody, which was all probabilities, they would dump it in that ditch. The treatment plant is not designed for that kind of operation to eliminate that stuff. It was important that we pipe that ditch to eliminate that threat. As far as the Sly Park intertie, we have a time limit on that. The grant, almost $11 million grant, which will pay for a third to 30 to 40% of that project, will go away. We have to start it. How many people here in this room would like to eliminate $11 million? It makes no sense. Now, when I got here many years ago, our bond rating was C+. Today, it's A. When we go out to borrow money, which we have to do these projects, the cost difference is humongous. And I could have our CFO confirm that. It's a huge difference over a period of time in millions of dollars between a C+ rating and an A rating that we have right now. Jim alluded to the fact when I first got here, we had 330 employees. Now we're down to 230 employees. There is a huge, huge cost difference in our daily operation. Now, as far as the bonds, we are in an inflationary cycle right now. If the cost of borrowing comes down, future boards can modify that 12% rate increase. It can. It would be within their discretion to do so. Now, what I had a comment about why we didn't protect the flume from fire. 90% of that flume lies on the U.S. Forest Service. We have to involve all the environmental questions of the U.S. Forest Service and the national specter. Now, as far as Silver Lake Dam, how many people, a lot of people have left. How many people were here at 97? Raise your hand, okay? Remember when 1 million yards of dirt came down and blocked the American River? Remember that? Well, we had to evacuate Coloma. If that would have broke loose in one fell swoop, we'd have lost the El Dorado EID power plant, the Spud plant. It would overtop Slab Creek, overtop Chili Bar, taken Coloma out. And you can imagine the lawsuits that would have been. Fortunately, it ate its way through and did it on a gradual basis. But if that dam breaks, we would have 8,600 acre feet of water in a torrent going down the American River. And we would lose Coloma, the historic national park. I don't think anybody in this room would want that to happen. Now, I guess that kind of wraps up what I had, because other things that, to reiterate, the domestic irrigation was deemed to be illegal. We had to stop it or declare it and end it. It wasn't our discretionary thing. It was deemed to be illegal. So thank you, Mr. President.
Okay. Director Day, any questions or so forth on the list of the presentation to staff or anybody, or based on anything you heard from the public that you wanted to clarify or get a question answered? Yeah.
Check. There we go. Just a quick comment, some language that Jim was using of that we need to, the alternative motion or substitute motion would, we'd have to not do or eliminate things. And I'm not suggesting that. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not do it or don't do it. It's what I'm suggesting, and what I think most people would understand and accept, is slow it down, spread it out, plan it out a little bit better, so that we don't, for instance, the 2 water treatment plants. Yeah, do those in years 6, 7, 8 maybe. But it's not an either or. It's not it's do it or don't do it. It's just plan it out, be more pragmatic. And as several people have said to me, one gentleman said it here, and I've gotten lots of emails, is please take into account what people can afford, what businesses can afford, what ag can afford. And I think the initial motion does not take that into account. Thank you.
Okay. Director Ranzini, any clarifying questions or?
Yeah, can you hear me? Otherwise, I'm going to try to pull this thing off. There. Okay, can you hear me now? Just a couple things that I'd like to kind of reiterate, and things that people haven't even thought about. One, I want to clarify. One, thank you for all the letters that you've been sending to me. I found none of them threatening, but I did find most of them disinformation. So that is only because the newer people who sent letters, I have no idea if they were ratepayers. There was one that was from Carmichael. There was another one from Orangevale. So I can only say people sending me letters who are not ratepayers, I will just push that aside. But many of you are. And I represent an area that has quite a bit similar to El Dorado Hills in Alan Day's area. But there's a lot more people in my area that I think that are not up at that $80,000 income level. A lot of them are retired people. I live in those areas. I know how people are with their when they're frugal about taking care of their water issues, including me. I am one of them. And I pay that monthly amount, that bi-monthly amount, just as anybody else would do. But I also feel that in the last about 4 years since I've been on the board, that I think that this district has been more sunshining and light, showing the daylight on how we do, how we provide water to people, how we provide wastewater services. We have a wonderful staff who's very, very experienced in this. Some of them have been here for years, decades of experience on how the El Dorado Irrigation District came to pass. It's been helpful. And we have been playing with this particular subject almost all year, as we identified. There has not been any hidden secret paths, handshakes regarding anything regarding rates for people. Prop 218 is a necessary thing that anybody raising rates or taxes, they must meet that demand to allow people to voice their concerns and their recommendations. Many of you made some great recommendations, but I want to clarify a couple things. Our general manager identified the grants, and it was in our slideshow, but I have been one of those people who have been harassing him on the fact that we need more grants. And in the budget for next year, we're hiring a grant writer. So I believe that this is going to really help. So please don't think that we're not thinking like you. We always are. The one person who called and said that we aren't showing enough daylight, thank you for calling in. I also recognize the fact that people are busy during the day. Somebody also identified that having a meeting during the business day makes sense to me because we have employees who work on the daytime. We have provided video Zoom opportunities for anybody to check in. We have sent so many newsletters, and many of the board of directors are involved with other community groups that keep that information flowing to our areas. So we're not null to this whole thing that we're just going to raise your rates and not think about it. So one other thing that I want people to think about, especially those who are listening in, I asked for a list of obligations that just a portion of what it takes to deliver water to your kitchens and your toilets, excuse me. But we pay over $1.8 million. We have paid over $1.8 million the last 3 years just for regulatory requirements. That's with the State Water Resources Board. That is with the Federal Energy Regulation Commission. That is with the USGS, with the USDA, and the United States Forestry Departments. So we work with all of these people, but we pay fees for them to help us manage our system. So I just want to get a little bit more clarity. We don't go into this job not informed. We go into this job trying to make sure, that we represent our ratepayers. So that is my comments, and I'll just let you take over.
Thank you, Lori. Director Dwyer?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody that took the time to come to this workshop and the previous workshops and to visit us online and make comments. Those don't fall on deaf ears. It's a decision that's very tough for us to make. We don't do this gleefully. And so I think we have to work hard at making the right decision to protect our infrastructure while looking at the impact on the ratepayers. And speaking of the impact on the ratepayers, we had a chart that showed the difference between 12% and 9%, not the 8, but it was $2. $2 difference in the impact on the rates for our customers. $8 at the 12% rate and $6 at the 9% as in the study. It'd be about that much for an 8% as well. And the cost of choosing the alternative is we really push off all of the effort and studies and workshops that we've done and ignore all of those things and just pick an arbitrary rate out of the sky. I don't think that's right. I would like to end with thanking Brian and Jamie for excellent presentations, and Jim for your comments on the study. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Dwyer. I had a few that felt we needed to get answered as well. Four-Bay Dam, I was not on the board when that decision was made. Maybe explain why it was done and what the benefit of that.
Dam safety made us
Oh,
do it.
okay, let Jim or Brian, yeah. I think I know that answer, but obviously people don't understand that. And just like with Silver Lake, we're going to come under some regulatory, they did at that time. But go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, Forebay Dam in Pollock Pines, that came under scrutiny with our dam safety regulators, both the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the State Division of Dam Safety. I think this was back in around 2003. Dam safety regulations changed over time. When it was built, it was fine, and there wasn't any pending dam safety issue, but the regulations changed, and we needed to upgrade that dam. So that started, we started working on that back in 2003. It took many years to get through, the scope of the project and the design and all the regulatory hurdles you need to do a dam upgrade. So that eventually began construction in 2017. It was a 3-year project that was completed in 2020. So I think the comment was, why not do Silver Lake instead of Forebay or before Forebay? But just Forebay got to the attention of our regulators before Silver Lake Dam. Silver Lake Dam, we started seeing issues with Silver Lake Dam around, we had the void in the top of the dam around 2015. And that's really when the regulators started requiring us to advance that project along as well.
And Brian, it was mentioned that maybe some older construction methods are okay today. We are highly regulated on how we have to construct. It's like the school districts and everything else. Department of Health and Safety and others regulate how you can and what you can. And you have to build to that, especially if you're going to apply for any grants.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. It was also asked on the base and the water commodity charges, maybe to explain that. It was said that maybe they're confused, or maybe I'm confused, but the question was around both of those, and it was a higher amount on those or something. So Jim, if you could, or maybe Jamie will have to do that one. But go ahead.
When you do a cost of service study, the first years there's always a little tweaking, if you will. You look at different customer classes, what their peaking factors are, what their water use are or is, and you allocate it on certain formulas. And in the first year, there's always a little tweak. Some are a little higher in the base, some are a little lower in the commodity. But then after that, it's an average of 12% increases over the last 4 years. So it's really kind of you kind of right-size the cost allocation in the first year based on those type of factors, again, like capacity factors, water use factors, things like that.
Okay, and I believe your statement earlier was in the 218 cost of service setting, we have to set at a minimum rate. Right, that'll be a maximum rate, but it could be less than that if this board determines on an annual basis that the money isn't being expended or so forth, and billing will be adjusted, so to speak, or?
Correct. If the board approves the Prop 218 proposal as staff is recommending, that caps the maximum rate allowed that the district can charge customers. And hypothetically, just say, the Silver Lake Dam gets deferred or delayed a little bit because of regulatory approvals. And we have to get the regulatory approvals by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, as well as Division of Dam Safety. So let's say that's postponed a year or two, and we don't need to go to bond in 27, but we'll go to bond in 28. Well, maybe that year the board says, well, we don't need the 13% or 12%, we'll do a 8%. So they can do that based on the budget for that annual, each year. You can adjust that.
Okay.
If I could just, one clarification, President Veerkamp.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want this to be misconstrued. If the board adopts the rates recommended today by staff, that would be the maximum amount that the district could increase rates over the next 5 years, unless it conducted another cost of service study, in which case, it could redo it. So, 5 years from now, if that were to happen, and it doesn't sound like staff thinks it would, just to clarify that the maximum that the district could adopt annually for the next 5 years would be capped under the proposed, or under whatever is adopted today, but that doesn't mean that the district couldn't conduct another rate study and another rate hearing, but would have to go through this whole process over again.
Thank you, Brian. Director Ranzini.
Yes, clarity from our attorney. Does that mean that if we approve the 12% across the board as proposed by the experts, that if next year we decide CPI drops down to 3, we can just automatically change it down to 5 for the following year? Do we have to go through the Prop 218?
No.
Good. Thank you.
No, as the general manager indicated, the district can adopt anything in it when it does its annual budget adoption each year. It can adopt increases less than what is approved during today's hearing, but it cannot adopt rates that are higher than that without conducting a new study.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Monthly and bi-monthly billing, that has been a topic of discussion. Jim, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, the gentleman actually caught me outside and was telling them that we've taken it to the board twice on what the cost difference is between bi-monthly meter reading and monthly meter reading. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but essentially we don't have it all radio reads and telepathic reads for meter reading. So we'd have to go out there every month to read meters, which is a lot more costly than it bi-monthly. If technology comes around where we can just have it radio us every month and we don't have the additional labor costs, we'd certainly entertain going to monthly meter reading and monthly billing. There is a cost issuing a bill every month too, as opposed to bi-monthly.
Thank you, Jim. And there was a question as well about ag taking a bigger hit. I talked to the lady outside and reiterated to her that amount was brought down to the residential rate, but you just want to reiterate that for the rest of the public?
I don't have the study in front of me. I think the base charge was a little, no, I think the base charge was around 9%. Actually, let me just pull up the study if I could. Actually, Jen, could you pull that study up? It's on slide 9.
The Prop 218.
Yes. Oh, here it is. Actually, the Prop 218 will only show the numbers. There's a percentage in the study I'll look up. So keep on going, Brian. I'll look up the study.
Well, the next one might be a little complicated. And I want you to listen to it, so.
Okay. Okay, hang on just a second then.
Do you want the
No.
Prop- okay.
Let me get to the study itself.
Do you need assistance?
No, I'm just coming up. The ag use for commodity was 13.8 and then went down to 12. And I'm looking at the base. It depends on meter size, but it ranges between 12 and 23, and then 12's after that.
Right.
It's the first year of kind of right sizing, and then it goes back to the 12s.
Okay. And then finally, I've only been on EID's board for 4 years. I was on the County Board of Supervisors for 8, and during that time, I was our county water agency chair for all 8 of those years. So I do have some familiarity besides being Folsom. City of El, or City, King, God, sorry, Alan. El Dorado Hills, assistant fire chief as well as fire chief. So I know the history of El Dorado Hills very, very well. And when it was initially started for development and what it was supposed to, how it was supposed to get its water and wastewater and so forth. And I think it was in 2008, EID made the determination that they're going to gravity most of El Dorado Hills' water to try to keep the cost down and bifurcate the system and, so forth, which I fully get and understand. But yet El Dorado Hills was meant to be something, and that's what it was, how it was supposed to be served. And EID did a great thing in trying to keep those costs down. So in this cost of service study, I did a little more deeper digging based on that information, and Jim and I've had the conversation about what are the potential costs of what we should be getting from El Dorado Hills or the West County on charges for whether it's pumping charges. We put almost $42 million into upgrading those pumps, and yet we gravity, and a lot of the input we had over the last few weeks was from residents of El Dorado Hills. Realistically, I think the number, Jim, and correct me if I'm wrong, you came up with is maybe EID is choosing to, I guess, I don't want to say bifurcate the system, but not getting all of the funding we should get from the west end of the county. And that question did come up about hookup costs and so forth, where we thought what we were charging was enough. But I think that number is getting up into the $100 million if you do this capital improvement projects down there in the next few years, of where we're not getting the funding that we should be getting from particularly maybe those customers down there. So I just want to put out there that we are trying to balance and run a system. The system is very convoluted at times and complex. 1,100 miles of pipeline is not an easy thing to take care of. And yet, it's very hard for people to understand that. Back to my school board days, we would try to get parents educated on simple issues. They wouldn't get it till their son or daughter was maybe affected by the playground activity the next day. Trying to get people to understand the complexity of these situations is very difficult. And this one's gotten very complicated in the last couple of years, not only in El Dorado County, but at the state level and at the regional level. And we're obviously very concerned about the future. And we've seen the costs that have escalated tremendously and will continue to, at least what it looks like for the near future. So it's very difficult to try to put this in exact science. But this board, and I applaud all of you, as well as our staff, for running this cost of service study, and some of the cost of service over the past years as well have not been implemented because of rate shock. And man, I tell you, we're all experiencing that rate shock at this point. So just given that, I wanted to just bring up that point, and if you have any comment relevant to that, and maybe as we look into next year, we should really be looking at, should we be capturing something more down there based on how it was originally intended?
I have a little bit of a comment because a couple things, and I have a slide on this. When we talked, I think it was Thursday or whatever, I didn't have time to send it to all the board members, but I did some work on this. First of all, the board adopted principles that said for El Dorado Irrigation District, we'll have one unified rate. We used to have a pumped rate out of El Dorado Hills, and that was a bone of contention. It was deleted before I got here, but we reaffirmed that it would be one system-wide rate. But I did do some work on it, and just to refresh my memory, what that would mean. And back then, it was anybody that had pumped water would have to pay a special fee. This, I just looked at El Dorado Hills Zone 2, which is the beneficiary of the El Dorado Hills Water Treatment Plant. And then it really dawned on me, if we're talking of spending $100 million in El Dorado Hills for Zone 2, which is 13,000 customers, it was an eye-opener. I'm not proposing that we change the policy of a unified, a uniform rate throughout the system, because I think that's the best way to go. But as we go forward, just in El Dorado Hills, we're going to be spending at least $100 million for infrastructure replacement. And then, and this also surprised me, the electrical costs to pump out of the Folsom Lake and treatment costs for the El Dorado Hills area was almost $1.8 million. And what really surprised me was when we looked at other costs, as we were trying to control costs, the other treatment plants only had $250,000 cost to pump. So it was an eye-opener, and then you look at cost per acre foot. So there's certainly, in the past, there was certainly some justification to have a different rate for El Dorado Hills Zone 2, just because of the large pumping costs down there. But again, I'm not recommending changing the principles that the board adopted and stay with the uniform rate. But this kind of puts that in perspective.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for putting that together. Director Osborne? And then Director
I
Davis.
just want to reiterate something. When I got here, I was the chief of CAL FIRE when I retired for 5 counties. I looked at the org chart, and we had 330 employees. I said, this is ridiculous. For the supervision of what was going on, we're down to 230 employees today. With that represents huge amount of money, not just in salaries, but in mandated benefits, Social Security, workers' comp, etc. It is a huge amount of money, and you can imagine what our rates would be if we still had 330 employees. And in difference, we've had to moderate our employee staffing, but in the long run, it's a huge amount of money we've saved our ratepayers.
Director Day?
Here, there we go. Yeah, when we did the, one district policy, and it does make a lot of sense, but it's not just about, you can find things in El Dorado Hills. And by the way, since redistricting, I only represent about half of El Dorado Hills. A couple other directors represent big chunks of it too. But you could find things that cost more there than other places, or you could theoretically proportion and have them pay more there. But the same could be said throughout our district. We have a sewage treatment plant up the hill that's underutilized. It was overbuilt and underutilized. And if we just allocated that cost to just the people immediately around there, it would be burdensome. The same with Outingdale, as that's an extreme case, but we can't assign those people, direct costs for that. That would not work. So the idea of costs, or we run pipeline in El Dorado Hills, and you have, I'm just making up numbers here, 400 connections on per mile, but you have running a pipeline further up the hill that might only have 40 connections. And so do we assign costs proportionally that way? No, it's the idea of the one district, and evening things out is what makes sense and has made sense for a long time, because otherwise we'd get into everybody pointing at everybody else, and it would not be, it would not be good for anybody. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director Day. Any further comments or questions? I believe then we are probably ready for the real question, and in I believe Robert's Rules of Order, the alternative motion goes first. And we
Yes,
had a-
sir.
And we had a motion and a second by Director Day and Director Anzini for maybe you should repeat it,
So
Jen.
what we'll do is I will repeat the motion on the floor, and then we will take a vote, and depending on whether or not that passes, we will move to the main motion. The motion on the floor, moved by Director Day and seconded by Director Anzini, that both base charges and commodity charges for single-family residential, multifamily, commercial, landscape, and rec turf, agricultural irrigation with and without residents, and small farms be reduced to 8% a year for each year, 2024 to 2028. All other rate changes in option 1 will remain as proposed, and that we direct staff to make the necessary adjustments to the budget and capital improvement plan to reflect these rates. That is the motion on the floor.
Okay.
No, I'll
Roll call.
call for those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no.
No?
No.
Division 4 and 5 voting aye. Division 1, 2, and 3 voting no. Motion fails. We will move to the second, the main motion, which is accept the cost of service report and adopt a resolution approving the increases and changes to rates reflected in the 2023 Proposition 218 notice. That was moved by Dwyer and moved by Director Dwyer and seconded by Director Osborne. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Those opposed say no.
No.
Division 1, 2, and 3 voting aye. Division 4 and 5 voting no. Motion carries.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you all as well for your participation. I know it's a cumbersome and complex project.
The public hearing is closed at 11:42 a.m.
All right, we'll take a couple minutes to let the room.
I'm
if
sorry?
anybody- We'll
There's
just
more
take a couple
items
minutes.
on the
Yeah,
agenda.
there's a lot more items on
I
the
mean,
agenda.
you certainly could stay.
You're all welcome to stay and listen to the rest of this.
I think they've had enough fun.
And the police leave.
Yeah.
All the threats
They
go.
just
Keep us
further-
from following up.
Director
somebody.
Anzini, just they're ratepayers, and they were, yeah, he was a
They're still
ratepayer and
ratepayers, yeah.
interested in the proceeding. He was also present during one of the workshops.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we will now proceed on with our meeting. We have item 17, director items. I believe, Director Dwyer.
Yes, thank you. That's my item. As you heard in the discussion, sharpen our pencil. What can we do to help control costs? And I also received 64 emails, thanks to Director Day reaching out to the public and asking for their comment on what we can do. And they also, a vast majority of them said, you need to control costs. A few of them were kind of entertaining about not having bonuses for the board, which I don't think we ever have. But it
Misinformation.
did drive me to look at what costs can we really control. And the next item or so, we're going to be looking at our operating budget. Basically, there's not much we can do in the short term with the operating budget. About half, approximately half of that budget is employee salaries and benefits. And the appropriate time to look at those is during the contract negotiation. So that's kind of off the table. The other half is pretty much out of our control. A big portion is, as you saw, electricity charges, which we're at the mercy of PG&E, just like everybody else. We have fuel charges, we have material charges that we really can't change in the short term. So that brought me to looking at what can we change in the short term. And I looked at our board compensation because I think if we're going to ask others to sharpen their pencils, we should sharpen ours first. And the board compensation, contrary to some of the public comments about our bonuses and exorbitant salaries, I'll quickly go over what the benefits are being a board member. We get a monthly stipend, maximum of $1,250 a month. That's mandated by, the cap is mandated by state law. We get medical reimbursement up to $5,000 a year for the board members to pay for either their own personal health insurance or things that aren't covered by their health insurance, dental, vision, that kind of stuff. There's a life insurance policy that's paid for a whopping $20,000. We don't get any pension benefits, no post-retirement, and we do get reimbursed for documented travel expenses going to doing district business, and those are reviewed monthly when we look at our warrant register. So the only one that's left really is healthcare insurance. Our board is entitled to full medical coverage for the board member and their family, the same as a full-time employee. And the board members work less, way less than full-time, even less than part-time. That healthcare insurance costs $30,000 per board member that chooses to use it per year. And we're looking at an election cycle coming up where we could have 3 new board members that all choose to do that. That would be $90,000 a year. If all 5 did, it's $150,000 a year. And over the 5-year rate study, that's near $750,000. So my motion is effective April 1st of this year, remove that benefit from board members and save a potential $750,000 over the 5-year rate study.
Is that the motion?
What?
That's a motion.
That's a motion. Do we
Yeah.
have a second?
I'll second.
All right, question of council. Yep.
I have a comment.
Okay, this one might be a legal question, though. It might
Okay.
put the whole thing to bed.
Good.
With the Board of Supervisors and the electeds at the county, you can't affect compensation package or benefit before the next election cycle. So a director that's currently receiving something or a board member or whoever can't be taken away because you've advertised that as a benefit for running for office. It could take effect for the next cycle of somebody new coming in, as Director Dwyer alluded to, but to change it midstream, I don't believe that was doable that was always county council's.
Makes sense to me,
There was
too.
some legal thing relevant to that when we sort of look into it, but that was my take on it. 'Cause that
Thanks for
always
that
came up.
question. I really have no idea what the what the rules are governing the Board of Supervisors, and it's quite likely that they are different. The irrigation district law provides that, as Director Dwyer indicated, a cap on the maximum compensation, but does specifically authorize the board the discretion over participating in benefits that are offered to district employees, including health and medical insurance. I'm not aware of any restriction in the irrigation district law that prohibits the board from exercising that discretion to either add or remove that. So it's certainly something that I can look into. But as far as I am aware, the restriction that you've referred to does not apply to this body.
I would just probably urge you to talk to county council and see. I think
Happy
I
to.
thought it was something to do with election law because it's something that's advertised and published and
Yeah.
so forth. So that's my, at this point, any questions? Go ahead, Dr. Anzini.
I think you are correct, Director Veerkamp, because I've been on other elected boards too. And the stipend that a board member is given is generally an authorization for them to go out into public and represent our district in leadership conferences, in water boards. I am currently on the Mountain County Water Regional Association. You're on LAFCO. I don't receive a stipend for any of that, but I represent El Dorado Irrigation District. So it's a community service that we choose, and then when we get elected. I also want to point out California Water Code Section 21166. And that's the authorization under state code that irrigation and water district board members get a compensation if they choose to with a max cap. So I would be wary of changing this before an election next year. It just looks punitive and it really looks petty. So I am not a person who receives any of the medical insurance. Be quiet. Marshall Medical. Anyway, I am not a person who takes the medical benefit, but what you're doing is you are asking only retired people who get a medical benefit to come and donate their community service. And you're only leaving that option open for people who are not in small businesses, who run their own businesses, but have good experience in being a voice for the people. So I am against this, and I will vote no.
Dr. Osborne?
No
Second it.
comment.
Okay.
Legally, I have a legal question too. I'm sorry. Ryan, because there was no specificity in option 1, would Director Dwyer's option be option 2? I know you're multitasking. I apologize.
Jen,
Director, item number 7, option 1 is limit board member compensation, but because there's no specificity, would it be option 2?
the distinction between options 1 and 2 is purely an internal one. It has no legal significance as long as the motion that is made is accurately reflected in the minutes. So whether you decide to add specificity to option 1 or to just characterize it as option 2 with the specificity that was articulated by Director Dwyer makes no legal differences, again, as long as it's accurately reflected in the minutes.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, at this point, we will go ahead and open up for public comment. It looks like we have some public comment in the room.
Yes, Michael Rafferty, I consider this just a cheap shot to compensate for the 12% increase.
Thank you, Michael. Anybody else wishing to speak on the item in the room? No? Anybody online, Jen, and we'll bring it back to the board.
If members of the public would like to address the board on Director item number 17, please refer to page 2 of today's agenda for detailed instructions.
And if I could just make one more comment in response, Director Anzini, the provision that you referenced is, as I stated, a part of the irrigation district law.
Right.
That is the provision that governs board member compensation and reimbursement for expenses. It does not discuss the issue of health insurance expenses, which is the subject of the motion. So I just wanted to make it clear that the motion does not limit compensation or reimbursement for necessary expenses.
Thank you for that clarification.
So what I would ask our motion maker and second, if they would be willing to defer this to this first quarter of next year while we get more information relevant to whether this can even be accomplished or not, and then we can have discussion around it.
Yeah, I'll table the motion until our meeting in January, until we get legal review.
Actually, you're going to continue this item until the board meeting in January? Is that your motion, that you're continuing the item until the board meeting in January?
This-
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further comment? Director Day.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem doing the vote now. I personally don't think it's illegal. I think the board can do what the board wants to do. But so again, I don't mind having the vote today. If we're going to do it, let's do it. But I'll get the elephant in the room out is that this is targeted at me. As far as I know, I'm the only one, my family and I, the only ones receiving health insurance through EID. And this whole board knows, the public doesn't, but the board knows that, and then also knows what my family's been through this last year with my daughter, and how very, very grateful and thankful we are and have been for this health insurance. It's meant a lot. But to be clear, I'm the only one on it. Past directors have used it. Future directors might use it. And I think that's good, as Lori pointed out. And thank you, Mike, for your comment. But to be clear, this is not about saving money, because it's not going to lower rates at all. And I just think it's about kicking me or my family off health insurance. Yeah, and ironically, here at Christmas time. Merry Christmas. And punishing me for daring to disagree with the rate increases and speaking up for ratepayers, which I'll continue to do irregardless. But that's what this is about. And I don't mind having to vote right now, guys.
So I certainly appreciate that, and if forced to vote, I'll vote away based on factual evidence, which I feel supports what is currently going on. But yet, everything is up for review as far as I'm concerned, and this board should be always looking at that. But again, as stated and pointed out, this is a very minute amount. It could get larger, especially if 5 members were to take it. I get that, but it's still a very small amount in comparison to the numbers we saw up there on the board relevant to capital improvements, and so I totally get that. So again, I'd rather have this discussion for the benefit of the district and not have it targeted at anybody. And if this is truly the way this board wants to go, then that's fine. But otherwise, if we do need to vote on it today, that's fine as well.
Well, the motion on the floor is
been amended.
to continue
Till January.
until January. So unless that motion fails, there is no main motion because both of them withdrew the main motion.
Correct. All right, so we will call for the question then on the motion, which is.
We just need to call for,
As the author, wouldn't he just withdraw and say, I'll post this another time?
Director Day, the motion on the floor,
To vote on it.
He withdrew till January.
yeah, we still have to, it's an item up for, that needs to be taken action on. Director Dwyer withdrew his motion, which eliminates the second, and the motion on the floor is to continue this item to the first board meeting in January of 2024. So that's the motion on the floor now.
Okay.
We've called for public comment.
Yes.
There was no additional public comment. So the only motion on the floor is option 2, take other action as directed by the board and continue this item until the first board meeting, January 2024, moved by Director Dwyer and seconded by Director Osborne. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Division 1, 2, and 3 voting aye. Division 4 and 5 voting no. Motion carries.
All right, we're on to item 18,
Yes,
Board of Directors.
that was my,
Ranzini.
it was my request.
Yes.
Considering that we just passed a rate increase to identify and solidify our capital improvement projects, I want to pull this off.
So we
As an
will
item.
option, then you can
I'm-
move option 3 since the agenda was already adopted.
Right,
Well, you can move option 3, take no action.
correct. I will make a motion that we take no action on this and case closed.
We need a second.
Second.
Public comment for Director item number 18. If any members of the public are wishing to speak, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. Option 3, take no action. Moved by Director Anzini and seconded by Director Osborne. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Those opposed say no. Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, we're at item 19, action item. Jamie.
Okay, good afternoon. Jamie Bandy, Director of Finance, here today to present the 2023-2024 mid-cycle operating budget and the 2024 to 28 five-year financial plan. Okay, next slide, Jen. So just taking a look at the timeline for this year's budget process, as you can see, we adopted last year's budget at the same board meeting in December. Moving forward this year, the cost of service analysis and Proposition 218 notice was issued, accepted and issued back in October. The same October 23rd meeting, the 2024 to 2028 capital improvement plan was also adopted. And then last month, I did bring a workshop item to the board to review this budget. I want to just point out that the information presented today in the budget does include the rates that were approved in the cost of service study today. Okay, so looking at today, we'll just take a quick look at the revised year-end projections for this year, as well as our revenue and expense projections for next year, 2024, our debt service coverage, as well as our five-year forecast, and look at our projected cash reserve balances. Okay, let's see. So looking at our end-of-year projections for 2023, overall, the revenues are coming in just under $2 million lower than anticipated. Some of the major contributors include our FCC revenue, which did come in a little, it's projected to come in slightly higher, as well as the hydropower sales. But our rate revenue is projected to come in slightly lower, and that's essentially due to less water due to a higher than average precipitation this year. Next slide, Jen. Looking at our revenue projections for next year, we are anticipating approximately $3 million higher. This does include the rate revenue from the increase that was just approved, as well as some FEMA reimbursement decreases. So combined, that gets us to about the $3 million increase. Next slide. So overall, this is just a graph looking at the different categories of the revenues for the 23 year, looking at our projections, as well as the last column, the 2024 proposed budgets. Again, that does include the rate increases that were just approved. So you can see across the board, bringing us down to total expected revenues for 2024 at about $106 million. Okay, next we'll take a look at our the budget, just kind of the development process of what we've gone through. Next slide. Again, what we typically look at in our projections is we take our actuals for about mid-year of the calendar year and really look at any known adjustments for those, as well as looking closer at our August and September budget status reports. And then again, lastly, the 2024 proposed operating budget does include the rate increases from the cost of service plan. Okay, next slide. All right, looking at our expenses for 2024, overall, we are looking at a net personnel increase of about $2.2 million, or roughly 7%. The gross wages, as you can see, are increasing. We do have an increase in our capitalized labor offset, as well as increases to our benefits. Next slide. And then looking at our materials and services on the expense side as well, we're looking at about a 3% decrease in those. Overall, some of the major components are our operating supplies, our chemicals, utilities, repairs, services, professional services. Those are all looking at increases. But however, as mentioned last month in our workshop, our tank recoating costs, we have been able to move those now to our CIP and being able to capitalize those. So that does decrease our operating budget. Okay, next slide. Again, this is just looking at our operating budget by department. Again, the 2024 proposed budget, if you look at total expenses, we are proposing at about a $65 million budget for the year. Next slide. And then this is really just kind of the same information, but broken down slightly different by expense type. If you notice at the top, we break out the wages and benefits. Then we also include the CIP and the development reimbursement labor offsets. And then kind of the third green line there is our total material and services to get us to that final number, again, about the $65 million expense projection for 2024. Now we'll take a look at our debt service coverage. Again, just looking at our 2024 proposed budget, our estimated revenues of about $106 million, minus our expenses of about $65 million. That leaves us with available net revenues of about $41 million. The debt service, so our senior debt service amount there, just under $15 million, does include, this is just our current debt service coverage. That does leave us with a debt service ratio of about 2.74. Next slide. Now we'll take a look at the 5-year financial plan and the cash flow projections. Again, just to kind of reiterate really what we are looking at when preparing a 5-year financial plan, some of the objectives that go into that are really just making sure we're generating adequate revenues to fund our operating costs as well as pay our debt service, meet our reserve targets, maintaining current service and reliability for the ratepayers. We've talked a lot, in our cost of service studies as well as the budget workshops about avoiding that customer rate shock. Really maintaining those strong credit ratings again for any of our debt issuances moving forward, maintaining our CIP funding levels, and then again, just the debt coverage ratios for our future bond issuances. Okay, so for the rates, again, just to kind of reiterate what we have included in this budget and what was approved in the cost of service study was a 12% rate increase to the water utility for all 5 years, 2024 to 28, as well as a 3% rate increase for wastewater and recycled water utilities for the same 5-year period. Again, just the implementing those rates, again, as we've discussed several times now, what the purpose of those increases are is to replace our aging infrastructure that we've taken, quite a detailed look at recently, as well as maintaining those debt coverage bond requirements. Next slide. Another thing I would like to point out here is our projections and proposed forecast for our FCC revenue. We were very conservative in the 5-year forecast. We did maintain a $10 million estimate for 2024, but we did significantly drop that down in the outgoing years. by the 27-20 year all the way down to $5 million. Next slide. Okay, so proposed debt issuances. At this time, included in the financial plan, we do have 2 debt issuances proposed for 2024 and 2027, estimated at about $60 million and $120 million respectively. You can see here some of the projects that we are including to be constructed using the bond funds. Next slide. This is just a graph showing what our current existing outstanding debt is from 2020 to 2028. And as you can see, just where we were in 21 as it increases and then slightly decreases each year. Next slide, Jen. This slide here does include the projected bond issuances for 2024 and 2027, so they were not on the last slide. And then the next one. And then this here is a chart of our annual debt service payments. And again, it does include the proposed 2024 and 2027 issuances there in the red and the golden color. Next slide. And then the last 3 slides are just looking at the actual 5-year plan. This first one depicts the district as a whole. So again, as you can see on the first year, 2024, really just the same information that we've reviewed, our total revenues, our total expenses. You can see at this point the cash balances, those do fluctuate a little bit. You can see towards the bottom, even with the rate increases, those do fluctuate a little bit as we move through the 5 years. And then lastly, at the bottom, you'll see what our debt service coverages are for those. The next 2 slides are just showing the water utility and the wastewater utility separately. Next slide. And that concludes today's presentation. Staff is option 1, adopt the 2023 to 2024 mid-cycle operating budget and 2024 to 28 financial plan. And staff recommends option 1.
Move on.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Questions? Comments? No? All right, at this point, we'll open up to the public for anybody wishing to comment or question. Seeing none in the room. Jen, anybody online?
If members of the public would like to address the board, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. This is action item number 19, option 1, moved by Director Osborne and seconded by Director Anzini. Does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak. Would you like me to call the vote?
Yes, please.
Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Those opposed, say no.
All right, motion carries 4-1.
Division 1, 2, 3, and 4 voting aye. Division 5 voting no. Motion carries.
All right, action item number 20, finance. Ms. Lane. Appropriation limits.
For number 20, there is not a PowerPoint. The reason why this is an action.
Yeah. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second?
Lori, Day and Anzini.
I just wanted to point out the reason why this is an action item is because we cannot approve this until the budget has been approved. That's why it's not on the consent calendar, and therefore that's why there's no PowerPoint presentation.
Right. So I would ask the board, do you want a presentation or are you ready to vote?
There's no presentation.
Oh, well, she's up here. So I want to give her the benefit.
That's
You did a
the
great
next-
job walking up here. Thank you very much.
The next item is hers.
I have a motion, a second. Anybody in the room want to make a comment? Anybody online? Appropriation limit.
If members of the public would like to address the board on action item number 20, option 1, moved by Director Day and seconded by Director Anzini, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2. Does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak. Would you like me to call the vote?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
Okay.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Item 21, Ms. Lane, you
Hi.
can stay right there. That's perfect. That's our audit report, 2022 audit report.
Yes, my name's Rebecca Lane. I'm your Finance and Accounting Manager. I've been with the district since about August of 2022. I'm very happy to be here. I'm here to present to you the fiscal year 2022 annual audit report. The slides that you're seeing here today are slightly revised from the ones that were posted with the agenda. I just wanted to kind of note that in case anybody had the other ones printed out. Over the last several months, you've had an opportunity to look forward for the district with respect to all of the finances, and I'm just going to put you in a time machine and take you back to 2022 as we review the numbers for 2022. David Alvey, our auditor, is here, and he'll be able to answer some of your questions when I'm done with the presentation. Okay, let's see here. Which one are we on right now? Let's see here. So as you know, each year, the board receives and files both the annual audit and the report on applying agreed-upon procedures related to the appropriations limit. So that's what we're going to be doing here today. Next slide, Jen. The audit is conducted in accordance to audit standards, and those are that are generally accepted in the United States, applicable to financial audits contained in government auditing standards, and meet the state controller's minimum audit requirements for California special districts. Mays & Associates performed the fiscal year 2022 financial audit. They also did 2021, and they'll be doing 2023. And as part of their additional scope was the review of the 2022 appropriations limit. Next slide. Okay, the auditor's responsibility is to express an opinion on the financial statements based on their audit and to issue a report on internal controls and compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements. Next slide. Mays & Associates did not identify any deficiencies in internal control that they considered to be material weaknesses, nor did they identify any instances of noncompliance or other matters that are required to be reported. They did identify what is termed a significant deficiency, which I'll discuss in the next slide. Okay, the significant deficiency that Mays & Associates identified was the timely and accurate year-end close. The condition and cause of this deficiency was significant staff transitions and turnover within the finance department, particularly in higher level positions. The effect was a delay in finalizing the audit due to a higher than usual number of post-closing journal entries and insufficient capacity to review the changes in a timely manner. Right, next slide. Okay, although the transitions and turnovers did take a toll on the finance department staff were afforded a very unique opportunity to identify gaps, tasks, and needs, and we've documented processes and procedures in response, including leveraging the financial software's reporting and functional abilities. All vacant positions have been filled, so we are staffed now fully in the finance department, and we are committed to completing future audits within 180 days of fiscal year end close. So I'll probably see you again in about 4 to 5 months. Okay, next slide. And next slide. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the financial statements review. Mays & Associates issued an unmodified, clean opinion that the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the respective financial position of the district as of December 31st, 2022 and 2021, and the respective changes in financial position and cash flows for the fiscal years. An unmodified opinion is the highest level of assurance that an auditor can provide. Essentially, other than the deficiency previously identified, there were no audit findings. Next slide. Okay, so now we're just going to take a look at a couple of the financial highlights throughout the year for 2022. Total assets and deferred outflows exceeded total liabilities and deferred inflows by $480.3 million. This 480.3 million is referred to as our net position. Capital assets, net of accumulated depreciation, totaled $832.2 million. This is an increase of $21.2 million from 2021. Also, I should note that the 480.3 million net position is also an increase over 2021 of about 12.6 million. You'll see some of the little point numbers at the very end. They'll vary a little bit because of rounding in some of the graphs. Operating revenues increased $4 million or 5.9% to $72.3 million over 2021. We did see an overall increase in pretty much all revenue categories, but highlighting that, water sales and service increased by $1.2 million. Water sales and wastewater sales and service increased by $1.4 million. And we actually had water transfer sales last year of about $500,000, and hydroelectric sales were also $500,000, and that's where the increases come from. Facility capacity charges were $11.2 million. This is a $5.3 million decrease from 2021. Water's portion of the FCCs were $7.3 million, and wastewater was $3.9 million. Operating, and I do apologize, that's supposed to be 13.4%. Operating expenses, excluding depreciation, increased by $7.4 million or 13.4% to $62.7 million. Total district debt service coverage ratio, including the FCCs, was 2.10, a decrease of 0.58 from 2021. Our bond requirements are 1.25, so we are still exceeding that. Total district debt service coverage ratio, excluding FCCs, was 1.57, a decrease of 0.26 from 2021, and our internal test minimum is 1.00. So I should note that even though our revenues increased, so did our expenses at a level that did drop our debt service coverage ratio a little bit. Okay, next slide. As of December 31st, the district had recovered approximately $7.2 million through insurance claims related to the Caldor fire. In 2021, we recovered $8.5 million, so to date, we've recovered $15.7 million. And I believe that for 2023, we are expected to recover a little less than $1 million, maybe right around the $750,000 mark. Actual operating revenues of $72.3 million was $5.3 million higher than budget. Actual operating expenses, not including the non-cash, non-budgeted pension and post-employment benefit accruals, were $61.5 million, and they were $1.5 million higher than budgeted. Actual FCC revenue of $11.2 million was $2 million lower than the budget. You saw Jamie had talked about some of the expected budgeting for the next 5 years. Okay, statements of net position. All right, next slide. Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, we had an overall increase in assets of $20.2 million to $991.4 million. We had an overall increase in liabilities of $7.5 million to $511 million for our new net position for 2022 of $480.3 million. This is an increase of $12.5 million over 2021's net position. Next slide. Our overall reduction in cash and investments was $13.6 million. This was impacted by a cash reduction of about $32.3 million, with a corresponding increase in investments of $14 million and restricted cash of $4.7 million. Next slide. Capital assets increased by $47.5 million, and this is primarily due to water plant in service assets and wastewater plant in service assets. And some of the highlighted ones are $33.3 million for the Forebay Dam upgrades, $33.2 million for water line replacement, which I think is an annual program, and about $2 million for the Deer Creek wastewater treatment plant process control improvements, and $1.8 million for El Dorado Hills water treatment plant automation upgrade. A lot of acronyms. Okay, next slide. We had a net increase of $61.1 million over 2021 in our debt portfolio. This is primarily due to the 2022A pension bond issuance of 71.5 million, less our debt service payments of approximately, I think it was $20 million. Next slide. Okay, this is our historical debt portfolio graph, and you can see that through 2019, there was a decrease in long-term debt and loans. And in 2020, in 2020, $61.1 million in debt was issued, and then the 2022 pension bond was issued of $71.5 million. Okay, this is a look forward into our future debt service. So you can see that over the next 5 years, we have approximately $30.3 million in debt service payments. This look forward does not include any of the proposed bond issuances that Jamie spoke about in the upcoming budget, 5-year financial plan. In 2025, we will be making our last payment for the 2014 bond issuance, and in 2026, we will commence making principal payments on our 2016 B bonds.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
This is not the same as what was given to us that's posted up online,
Yes, it's a little bit different.
because 30 million versus 22 million.
That was from last year, yes. I didn't adjust the number. I do apologize.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hopefully it'll be corrected.
And then, as along the lines of the 30.3 million being our average debt service, I did also break that down for you so that you knew over the next 5 years, it breaks out to be about 18.2 million in principal payments and 12.1 million in interest payments. Okay, next slide. Okay, this slide has a lot of information, but essentially, the net change in pension liability from 2021 is $11.7 million. In 2022, you can see that as a result of the 2022A pension bond, the employer-employee contributions were 80.2 million, which left us with a 98.1% net position relating to the $201, I don't know if I can work that pointer, of the $201.7 million in pension liability. Does everybody see that and have any questions? It's a complicated slide.
Record wire. Actually, I have a question, and I probably should know the answer, but when we did that refinancing of our pension liability by issuing the bonds, we also said we were going to keep, in my opinion, we were going to keep that pension liability at zero by applying our retained earnings or whatever was necessary, so we didn't have to go through another bond issue. Is that correct, or am I off?
Yes, I believe that that is the goal of the district. So what happens every year, right, is you have an actuarial assumption, so that amount at the end of every year could fluctuate. And I do know that what we did pay with the 2022A pension bond was what was like due and accrued for past years, right? So going forward, we are trying to stay current with that.
Okay,
that
thank you.
answer?
That's, just wanted to bring that point home because I know the CalPERS estimates are always way overly optimistic, and we end up paying the difference.
Right, and you can see this year, last year, I think it was a $25.5 million, we were like ahead because of the market. And this, last year, well, 2022, we had $11 million loss.
Thank you.
Director Day.
Yes.
Yeah, I think when we did that bond, we were going to, in a couple of years, ask for a follow-up to see how we were comparing to if we'd stayed in, the traditional CalPERS thing versus the bond. Do we have that coming up in 2024, Jim?
I don't remember that, but we'll do it.
We can
Okay.
definitely do it, yes.
There was a review.
We'll definitely do that. Okay, any other questions on that slide? Oh, you can also see, right, the actuarial assumptions by the CalPERS management team, they used a 2.3% for inflation and a 6.9% for a discount rate. Those will kind of become important in the next slide because they differ slightly from what the actuary used that we use for our OPEB calculations. Next slide. Okay, so same with this other slide that's set up the same way. We had a net change in OPEB liability from 2021 of $1.2 million. There was that net investment income loss of $1.8 million. As a result, our net position relating to the $37.4 million liability for 2022 dropped to 32.1%. It was 34, I can hardly read this, so I think it was 38% the prior year. The assumptions that this actuary used were a discount rate of 6.75% and inflation of 2.5%. So a little bit different than what the CalPERS management team used, but close. Next slide, Jennifer. Okay, so now we're going to talk real quickly about the revenues and expenses and changes in that position. Next slide. We have, with respect to the operating and non-operating revenues, so here they're combined, as are the non-operating and operating expenses. We had a net loss of $3.3 million before factoring in capital contributions, which were $15.8 million, and those consist of FCCs and developer contributions. It still resulted in an increase in net position over 2021 of 12.5%. Next slide. This is a breakdown of our expenses, not including like amortization or depreciation. So you can see that personnel expenses is, as someone had mentioned earlier during the meeting, that it is the majority of our operating and non-operating expenses. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, next slide. Okay, so the operating income excluding depreciation and amortization measurement is a financial performance indicator used by companies to show profitability in ongoing business operations. So our operating expenses, which differed from the combined operating and non-operating in the prior slide, is $72.3 million. Our operating expenses less depreciation and amortization is 62.7. And just so you know, our depreciation and amortization totals about 25.3 million for 2022. So our expenses are really up in the $88 million range. But that netted us with operating income of 9.6. And then when you factor back in the non-cash OPEB, year-end OPEB and pension accrual, it gives us an operating income of 10.8 million, net operating income. Next slide. Okay, and we'll just go over some financial ratios. Next slide. Our credit rating is still at AA3 and AA-. We haven't changed from last year. Next slide. This is another way of looking at kind of debt service coverage, or no, this is our debt service coverage, I apologize. So it takes our total revenues and our total expenses and gives us a net revenues available for debt service. And then we factor in our debt service payment for the year, and it gives us a particular ratio. So it shows you that our ending overall is 2.10. If you look at it from just water's perspective, it's 1.88, and wastewater is 2.61. The second row of numbers is if we take out the FCCs. So it drops everything down just a little bit. 1.38 for water. Whoops, thank you. Thanks, you can go forward, Jennifer. And this is another way of looking at debt service coverage. This is just overall total debt with our operating revenues. And this 5.54 number, it does exceed the national median of 2.10. Next slide. And I want to point out I did neglect to change the little red sentence at the bottom to 220. But our days cash on hand ratio is 220 days. And you take our unrestricted cash and investments, multiply it by 365 days, and then divide by our operating expenses net of depreciation. And that gives us 220 days. The national median is 451, so we are about 50% of that. This asset condition ratio kind of gives you an idea of where our capital assets stand with respect to life. So you take the net fixed assets of 832.2 million, you divide it by our annual depreciation expense of 25.3 million, and it gives us a ratio of 33 years. This ratio of 33 years does exceed the national median of 26 years. And so that's why it's important to keep up with our, keep up with the maintenance of our capital assets. Next slide. Okay, this is our debt to capitalization ratio, and it's total debt, which is the 402 million, divided by the total debt plus net position, which is 44%. We remain in the strong range of this ratio, which happens to be between 35 and 50%, so we're right in between all of that. Okay. Next slide. Mays and Associates performed agreed-upon procedures related to the calculation of the 22 appropriations limit and did not identify any findings. And if you don't have any additional questions for me, I'll let Mr. Alvey come up and speak. Any other questions for me? No? Okay, good. All right, Mr. Alvey.
Very good. Good afternoon, board members. My name is David Alvey. I'm an audit partner with Mays and Associates, CPA, and we're the independent external auditor for the district. And so my role coming in every year is to issue an opinion of whether or not, in my firm's opinion, that we feel that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. And I'm pleased to say, as Rebecca said, that we have given an unmodified or clean audit opinion, and that's on page 1 of the report. We also have a compliance opinion in the back on page 126, and that's in compliance with governmental auditing standards. And you need that compliance opinion because you received more than $750,000 from a federal granting agency, FEMA. So we have to do a separate single audit that we're currently working on now for those FEMA funds. But again, the clean opinion, highest level assurance at a CPA firm, and it basically says that the financials presented for your review and approval, in my firm's view, are presented fairly in all material respects. We also have what's called a memorandum on internal controls and required communication, and that's the second part of your packet. And that's my firm's communication to this governing body of things that we found during the audit. And they can be categorized in 3 ways. Material weakness means something material can flow through the internal controls and not get caught. We have none of those. Significant deficiency, like Rebecca mentioned, you had your finance department decimated. A lot of turnover at high-level people, and unfortunately, that's not uncommon these days. And working with Rebecca and Jamie and Carla, we were able to unravel a lot of things and get to the point, and I'm confident that we will be issuing the 2023 much sooner in the coming year. And then the third category is other matters. The only thing I have in the other matters is just upcoming government accounting standard board pronouncements coming down the pipeline. Nothing major is coming down the pipeline that will affect your financials, not like the pension or the other post-employment benefits. That's really good news. The second part of that is the required communication. Now, generally accepted auditing standards require that I tell you that we had no disagreements with management. We had no disagreements with management's accounting assumptions, like useful life for capital assets, assumptions in your pension and OPEB liability. We don't think there was any second opinion. We don't think management had a CPA firm in the wings in case they didn't like our opinion. And then lastly, that we don't think there was any scope limitations. Management was completely open and gave us everything that we asked for. And with that, I'd like to open up any questions and thank Jamie, Rebecca, and Carla for all their help.
Questions? Seeing none. Director Dwyer.
Just a comment. I'd just like to say congratulations to Jamie and the accounting staff for having a clean audit. It's a complicated system. Obviously, there's often a lot of differences in opinion about how to allocate costs that we hear from the company, and that's kind of standard practice of cost allocation.
Right.
And so we thank you all for the work that you've done, and we thank you, David, for the positive comments.
Yeah.
All right. Seeing no other questions or comments?
So we'd like the board member to move option 1, somebody.
I figured that was coming.
Sorry, next slide, please.
Yeah, I'm not one of you guys.
Well, actually, we need to, we can't just move. It's receive and file the 2022 annual audit and 2022 report on applying agreed-upon procedures related to the appropriations limit. Staff is recommending option 1.
So moved.
Motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Second, thank you, Director Anzini. Any further comments or questions? No? Anybody in the audience wishing to comment or question? No? And online, anybody wishing to?
If members of the public would like to address the board on action item number 21, option 1, moved by Director Dwyer and seconded by Director Anzini, please refer to page 2 of today's agenda for detailed instructions. President Veerkamp does not appear. Any members of the public are wishing to speak. Would you like me to call the vote?
Yes, please.
Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much for your work and helping out with the audit. Item 22, engineering. Mr. Kessler.
This is a mandated operation, whether we like it or not. Every 5 years, we have to have a outside consultant evaluate our safety of our dams. So I'll move option 1.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion or questions? We're just trying to probably save a little time here.
Yeah.
Anybody in the
Pretty
public
clean.
wishing to speak on this item? Anybody online, Jen?
And it was significantly cheaper than the other bid.
So option 1 is award a contract to KGS Group in the not to exceed amount of $416,500 for dam safety engineering services to perform the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission required 2024 independent consultant safety inspections. Option 1 was moved by Director Osborne and seconded by Director Day. Members of the public are wishing to speak. Please refer to page 2 of today's agenda. President Veerkamp, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak. Would you like me to call the vote?
Yes, I would. Great presentation, Mr. Kessler. Appreciate it.
Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Good job.
Just want to say thank you and hi and bye.
Very much. Item 23, engineering, Ms. Carrington.
All righty. Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Liz Carrington, Senior Civil Engineer here at the district. Today, I'll be presenting a construction contract change order and project funding for the Echo Conduit Emergency Replacement Project. Previous board actions, the board adopted a resolution declaring an emergency regarding the storm-related damages. In July, the board authorized a construction contract, monies for engineering services and project contingency for $1,312,000 for the Echo Conduit Emergency Replacement Project. Next slide. Okay. Summary of issues. The Echo Conduit was damaged during the 2023 storms. The project will replace about 25% of the total Echo Conduit. Design assumptions have changed during the project development and further construction. The schedule has also been delayed due to material supplies issues, unforeseen site conditions, and weather. The Echo Conduit was originally installed in the 1920s, so it's about 100 years old. This pipeline conveys about 2,000 acre-feet from Echo Lakes to Project 184 for consumptive use and power generation. Next slide. The 100-year pipeline was identified as early as 20 years ago. It's been on and off the CIP, but it's been identified for replacement for wear and tear purposes and also safety and seismic requirements. It's not currently on the CIP as it is a deferred project. The pipeline was damaged during the storm events. Staff responded by contacting Siblon Reed to start an emergency replacement construction contract, similar to Caldor Fire. Staff also engaged with Waterworks for an emergency design contract, and the design and construction progressed in parallel. Alrighty, I wanted to share a few of these photos. Previously, as presented, some of the photos were of the damage from the top of the hill. This is a very, very steep terrain with Highway 50 down at the bottom. Photo on the left, that is the bottom of the trestle section, as you can see from standing on the scaffolding. Staff tried to temporarily secure it with steel cabling, but you know those wooden timbers are 100 years old, so it's been well past its life. Also, the picture on the right, that is the previously circular echo conduit. Excellent. All right, work performed to date. The pipeline that was replaced is about 600 feet. The crane can reach 100 feet on either direction. So work started with construction of 3 crane pads. The picture on the left, I did want to note there is a worker in the center of the photo just to depict the size of the concrete blocks and the scalability of this project. Next slide. All materials were removed from the current alignment up to the top of the hill so they can be transported down the hill. Everything that was demolished has been taken off via crane, and everything that was installed was brought down with the crane. Next slide. All right, so far the 400 feet of on-grade pipe segment has been constructed. Also the concrete supports, you can see there's some ice and snow, so we've had some weather issues. Also adding to this construction contract change order. Next slide. So this is not a current up-to-date photo, but the 200 feet of trestle section has been constructed. Also the pipe is on top of the trestle, fully constructed, and water can flow as of today. Next slide.
Question.
Yes.
I know that we've been up there a couple of times and bravely walked part of it. And it's a direct shot, yes, Director Anzini and myself and many others. It's a direct shot straight down to Highway 50 from where this conduit is. If the conduit was damaged and severely damaged, does Echo Lake top out? Does it overflow the dam?
We do have an emergency spillway. So this year we were not able to convey water through the conduit while project was in construction. We do have some logs that we can remove, and I see Carrie Meschler willing to walk up and give a little bit more of operational information.
Okay, good, because I think if the dam was topped and it started out the spillway, I know there's 2 ways it can go. One is down into the Lake Tahoe, and the other one is through our pipeline into the eventually Upper American River. And so is there a danger of having the dam start to spill and then the water cascading down onto Highway 50 or bringing debris with it?
So Carrie Muchler, hydroelectric manager. No, right now we have emptied the lake. We were trying to save as much water as we could with the hope of being able to convey the water if the repairs were able to get done in a timely manner. When that became evident that it wasn't, we did have a variance to keep that impoundment for a little longer than it's normal. But we have since then sent all that water to Tahoe in a controlled manner. So we are well below it's empty is what it is sitting right now. So we will not spill or anything like that at this time. We're going to be waiting to impound new water and be ready for next year.
Thank you, Gary.
All right. At this time, a construction contract change order is needed for a variety of reasons. First of all, the construction cost proposal was developed prior to the final design. Like I had mentioned previously, it was almost similar to a design-build situation where Siblon was working with Waterworks, the design engineer, to find materials that were readily available, but also met seismic and safety requirements.
And also, just to note on the seismic and safety requirements, that drastically increased the amount of rebar and the amount of concrete, which was a big element of this cost. Also, did want to note that final design changes, unforeseen site conditions, and delays were all documented during construction that feed into this construction contract change order. Next slide. Okay. The construction contract change order was divided into 3 subgroups, the on-grade section. I did want to take a picture and show the board pictures of what we were dealing with. So in order to account for the seismic and the safety conditions, we had to add quite a bit amount of rebar, and that was tying into that rock that you're seeing on that hillside. So it was a bit of a field fit situation for every single one of those supports. Next slide. Additionally, for the on-grade section, so once Ciblon was contracted to perform the work, we had a field meeting with the crane subcontractor. So we had to have quite a bit of additional aggregate base to provide a proper foundation for that crane to be supported on the hillside to operate safely. Also, we've had some weather issues, and so all of the concrete had to be tented and heated just so it could cure properly. Next slide. As far as the elevated section, the original plan was to do 3 trestle sections and a specific length of beam. Unfortunately, on the downhill abutment, there was some unfavorable subsurface conditions, and so we had to add a 4th trestle section, an additional 15 feet of beam, so we can have something to properly support the pipe too. Next slide. And then as far as the trestle section itself, to account for safety and seismic parameters for this project, we had to use more stout and robust members for each of the sections for the trestle. And I did want to take this one picture and include it on the presentation. There was no hot work in the forest. All of the connections were bolt-up connections with pre-welded flanges. This required a very significant amount of precision on all of the survey. So part of the construction change order is additional survey to make sure that when members were flown down by the crane, they would measure up with this level of accuracy. Okay, next slide. These 2 pictures are on the downstream uphill section of abutment. Initially, when some of that duft and everything was removed, when we were trying to find suitable subgrade, we all looked at these rocks and said, you know, we can't leave this as is. So part of the construction contract change order is to install rockfall netting, just so this beautiful piece of infrastructure that we're just now creating will not be subject to rockfall. Next slide. Staff is requesting funding for a contract change order. Additional monies for waterworks engineers. There was quite a bit of field engineering that we had to do for this project. Also, additional funding for inspection, capitalized labor, and contingency for a total funding request of $656,175. Board options. Option 1, approve a contract change order to Ciblon Marine Contractors in the not to exceed amount of $518,000 for construction of the Echo Conduit Emergency Replacement Project, and authorize additional funding of $41,175 for engineering services, $20,000 for inspection, $25,000 for capitalized labor, and $52,000 in project contingencies for a total funding request of $656,175 for the Echo Conduit Emergency Replacement Project. Okay, any questions?
Staff recommends option 1.
Staff recommends option 1. Thank you,
Question,
Jen.
this additional cost, is this applicable to our insurance for damage, snow dam, or can we submit that for, yeah, okay.
Yes, staff has submitted this
Well,
project.
I can say over my
We need
time
a,
in this
before, George, before you, excuse me, Director Osmore, before you make comments, we need a first and a second. You can ask questions.
I'll move it.
The motion, do we have a second? Second. Director Day? Yeah, George.
Ciblon Reed is probably one of our better contractors. And my experience with them and our staff's experience with them has been above board. So I would strongly recommend that the board adopts this, and the fact that maybe we could get it back from our insurance is even a plus. So thank you.
We have a motion and a second. Any other comments or questions? Anybody in the room wishing to speak? No? Anybody online?
If members of the public would like to address the board on action item number 23, option 1, moved by Director Osborne and seconded by Director Day, please refer to page 2 of today's agenda. President Vera Camp, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak. Would you like me to call the vote?
Yes, please.
Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, we're at item 24, which I will recuse myself. Director Day, would you please take item 24?
All right, check, check. Item 24, got to pay our bills, general warrants. Do I hear a motion?
I'll move.
I'll second.
All right, motion and a second. Any public comment in the room? Don't see anybody online. Jennifer?
If members of the public would like to address the board on action item number 24, option 1 moved by Director Anzini and seconded by Director Dwyer, please refer to the instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. Director Day, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak. Would you like me to call the vote?
Yes, please.
Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries. I just want to remind folks that we did move the nomination and
Yes,
election of board
and go
president,
next.
vice. Okay.
All right, so we are now at the nomination and election of president and vice president for the 2024 year. Director Anzini, I believe, has a motion or a
Yes, I have a
correction or
motion. I'd like to nominate, as this board normally does, follow through a consistency. I would like to nominate Director Day for president and Director Dwyer for vice president.
I will second that. Any comments? No? Questions? Anybody online want to beat that one up?
If members of the public would like to address the board on the nomination and election of next year's officers, please refer to the instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. President Camp, it does not appear there are any members of the public are wishing to speak on the nomination and election. Would you like me to call for the vote?
Yes.
Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no.
President
Division
Day?
1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
President Day, you're in charge. Long agenda left.
Well, we'll be going to closed session. By the way, thank you, President Verkamp, for an excellent year and for handling today's meeting. I especially appreciate that. Counselor, do we have an estimate for a closed session?
President Day, the board will be meeting in closed session as per the agenda for closed session item A. I anticipate that the board's consideration of that item will require at least 15 minutes.
All right, that sounds good. We will return no sooner than 1:15.
However, the board can return after 1:15. For the purposes, this Zoom session will be shut down, but we will open the same Zoom session once the board returns from closed session.
All right, we are back at 1:32 from closed session, item A, Counselor.
President Day, coming through on the microphone. Here, I'll use this one. Lights on. Thank you very much. The board met and conferred regarding the matter agendized as closed session item A. It provided direction to staff but took no reportable action, and that concludes my report.
All right, do we have any closing board comments or assignments they'd like to request? Lori?
No assignments, but I want to thank the staff and EID employees for all the hard work they've given us this last year. And we appreciate everything you've done. So I hope we all have a happy holidays.
All right, and Jennifer?
None today.
All right, thank you, everybody. Have a Merry Christmas and a good New Year.
Meeting adjourned
Meeting adjourned.
at 1:33.